Sometimes, when it seems like the whole world is against you, a miracle happens. But Nam Ja-yu lived another day, not believing that anything would change. She had no friends, and today, the rain also spoiled her mood. After all, many students had umbrellas and took those without one under their wing. While everyone huddled together, Ja-yu continued to get soaked in the rain, as she also hadn't brought an umbrella, and no one invited her in because they considered her strange. But the girl wasn't offended by them and simply went her own way. After all, even if she stood with the others, she still wouldn't fit and would get wet. Some were surprised that she calmly endured it, and a few even felt sorry for her. In that short time, she was already soaked to the bone, when suddenly, someone called out to her. Yo Jae-hyuk approached her and offered her his umbrella. The girl was surprised, and even more so that this guy had even spoken to her at all. Unconsciously, Ja-yu said his name aloud, and he was surprised that she knew it. She couldn't not know, because besides the fact that they are in the same class, it's unlikely that there's anyone in the entire school who doesn't know Hyuk, the most popular person here. This guy is the life of the party and is surrounded by a crowd of people every day. And Cha-yu is talking to him for the first time now, and so closely. Now, being close, Hyuk seems even more beautiful to the girl than usual. The guy himself noticed that his classmate had very sleepy eyes, as if she hadn't slept for several days. In any case, he took pity on her and offered her his umbrella. He will hide under his friend's umbrella, and Ja-yu doesn't have to worry about him. The girl agreed but couldn't take her eyes off him, even when he said goodbye. And a little drawn out, as if hypnotized, she expressed her gratitude to him. Then Hyuk quickly headed towards his friends a few meters away. Ja-yu tried to understand what made such a handsome man talk to her. Now she also has to figure out how to return this umbrella to him later. Usually, you can't get close to him, as he is always surrounded by a large crowd. Still, she decided to try approaching him later, even though she doubted he would hear her again. Arriving at school the next morning, Yu noticed only 2 people near Hyuk. This was her chance to approach him and try to talk. As she took a few steps, the boy was standing with his back to her, and Cha-yu quietly coughed apologetically, making her presence known. But then another classmate got indignant, shouting that there was something strange behind Hyuk's back. Like many, that girl disliked Ja-yu, but she was already used to it, and only after handing Hyuk the umbrella, she thanked him again for helping her out yesterday. Turning around, the guy greeted her by name, which surprised her. But they are in the same class, and there's nothing strange about Hyuk knowing her. The girl was still in a daze. She was always alone, like a ghost that sometimes appears. At that moment, a friend approached Hyuk, suggesting they go to the store before the break ended. That guy is sure they'll make it back if they run there and back. And Cha-yu, whom no one pays attention to because she is aloof and not talkative, was left alone. Even now, the schoolgirls, discussing that the teacher was looking for her, didn't even notice that such a student was among them. And the handsome Hyuk was the first to notice her since graduating from middle school. The girl couldn't believe that anyone in the class even knew her name. This guy became popular right after he enrolled. He was an excellent student, and he also had great results in sports, and no other guy could compare to his brilliant beauty. Because of this, even strangers would surround him, and there was no one who would hate him. In other words, Yo Jae-hyuk is like the main character from a youth drama, and he probably doesn't know what it's like to eat alone or watch a movie by himself. A guy like that doesn't even need to think about where to sit on the bus for a school trip. A little later, his friend Go So-hee asked about the girl who approached him. Go didn't even remember her name correctly, calling her a strange long-haired person, and she asked Hyuk not to approach her as there were bad rumors about her. The guy didn't understand such aggression because she was their classmate. But everyone considers Ja-yu strange because she looks like a psychopath from a detective series. Once Go saw her bulging eyes roll back and almost wet herself. This conversation was overheard by Cha-yu, who was standing around the corner and was charmed that Hyuk called her a classmate. But she was puzzled that she was called a psychopath from a TV series, even though Cha dressed in a uniform like all other students. More than anything, she was interested in what it was like to be friends with Cha-hyuk. She was sure that he had only remembered her name, but nothing else. She couldn't even dream of being friends with him. She didn't even have regular friends. However, now she was haunted by the desire to casually strike up a conversation with him when she passed by. although she was worried that Hyuk might be scared of her or feel uncomfortable. But then a little later on the street, he himself waved to her as he walked past with his friends. Ja-yu, who was cleaning, unconsciously raised her hand slightly in response and immediately got scared. Although he definitely greeted her, there was no one else next to her at that moment. And also, Guo was staring at her, who was against Hyuk talking to Yu so that he wouldn't have nightmares. Ja-yu immediately turned her head the other way, as if she saw nothing around her. Lee Hyuk decided that she hadn't noticed him waving hello. The guy was confused, in fact, much more connected to him and Ja-yu. While everyone considered him the life of the party, in reality, he was as much an introvert as she was. Yo Jae-hyuk disliked being the center of attention since childhood, but as he grew older, his face became more and more handsome, and he couldn't avoid attention. Everyone envied this guy's beauty, and he had to put up with it. Moreover, he has a good personality, and his manners and behavior are excellent. As a result, Hyuk was imprisoned in a place called school and received punishment in the form of popularity. While he is surrounded by attention at school, he tries to smile all the time, but most of his thoughts were filled with the desire to go home as soon as possible. The guy also sometimes dreamed that the world would become uninhabited forever and no one would know him. And then he met Ja-yu, who had no problem staying separate from society. One day, she came to sit on a bench at the stadium where the guys were playing football. And even though she was far away, Hyuk noticed her, especially since there was no one else on that bench. He would have liked to go over and talk to her, but he never dared to. Besides, Cha-yu herself never looks at other people, and she doesn't care at all how she looks in the eyes of others. She doesn't try to adapt to anyone, and all the students consider her strange. However, in Yo Jae-hyuk's eyes, her behavior seemed special from the very beginning, and he really wanted to be friends with her, but he didn't know how to approach her. Because of her unsociability, it seemed that Cha-yu herself didn't want anything like that. Her eyes said that no one should care if she was alone or got wet in the rain. And Hyuk was a little sad that this girl was too closed off from the world. And now, when she didn't respond to his greeting, the guy mustered up his courage, and he headed in her direction, puzzling Go, who guessed his intentions. Hyuk approached the window behind which Cha-yu was cleaning and knocked. The girl immediately came over and opened half of the window, but she wasn't in a hurry to speak. There was an awkward pause for a couple of seconds, and then Hyuk was the first to greet her. However, Za-yu was in no hurry to reciprocate, and he became nervous. But that's usually what happens when an introvert starts a conversation without preparation. Za-yu froze just like Hyuk, as if she had forgotten all the words in the world. And the moment that could have been the beginning of their friendship was on the verge of disaster. Cha-hyuk almost never spoke to people first, because they, like fanatics, always started the conversation first. The guy has no problems with speech, but if he does speak, it's not much. And in general, he can just be silent while everyone admires his beauty and showers him with compliments. And now he regrets not thinking before starting a conversation with you. The awkward silence continued, but there's still a chance to change something. And Ja-yu, who was even more uncomfortable, greeted him briefly but sweetly. In his heart, the guy was overjoyed that she had replied to him. Now all that was left was to talk about something they had in common. And he asked if she had noticed when he waved to her from afar. Yu had seen it but ignored it, and now she thought he had deliberately come over again to say hello. But she only briefly admitted to him again that she had noticed his greeting. This made Hyuk happy again, but he kept himself in check. Their conversation could end here. He didn't want that and noticed a mop in her hands. Although that would be a terrible topic for conversation, and he would look like an idiot. And while he was gathering his courage, he jumped onto the windowsill outside. Then he deftly swung his legs over and was inside the room in an instant. After that, he offered to help Ja-yu with the cleaning, realizing that it was her turn on duty. The girl wanted to object, but at that moment, the teacher reprimanded Hyuk for his method of entry. It was impolite of him to enter through the window, and the guy apologized. Ja-yu was silent this whole time, only observing her classmate, who, slightly embarrassed, turned to her and smiled sweetly. In the end, they were both pushing mops across the school corridor floor. While Ja-yu stared blankly at the rag, Hyuk occasionally glanced at her. He thought that if they started cleaning together, they would start talking. but in the rhythm of silence, both of them diligently scrubbed the floors almost to a shine. Besides, they had nothing to talk about, and Hyuk knew nothing about her except her name. And he started to recall what he usually talked about with the guys. The first thing that came to mind was sports. But looking at her slender, graceful body, he understood that this would hardly be interesting for her. And he was also worried that all this time, she hadn't even looked in his direction. To get closer somehow, he tried to rub the floor next to her. Meanwhile, his friends were trying to figure out what bug had bitten Hyuk. Sun Chan-woo became curious about who he was cleaning with. He didn't know this girl, and so he, with some disgust, explained that it was their classmate. These two students found it strange to see their friend suddenly communicating with someone they didn't know. And then Sun noticed how that girl cast a glance at Hyuk, as if a ghost was watching from an alleyway. Sun Chan-woo even got scared. Ja-yu's face, which was always pale, was terrifying at that moment. So he even advised her friend to just get out of there before that girl jinxed them. No matter how much she observed Yu, she seemed like an unpleasant person to her. And now she had a feeling that Ja was about to kick Hyuk in the back with a mop. Actually, she just called out to him to get ready, as the cleaning was finished. And, stumbling a bit from excitement, she thanked him for his help. However, the guy was glad that this quiet girl had even spoken to him, and, out of foolishness, he blurted out that he actually had fun messing around with the mop. What made Ja-yu seem like a misophobe, because she saw nothing fun in cleaning. However, she said nothing about it, only modestly lowered her eyes, and began rummaging in her pocket, searching for something at the very bottom. Then, taking out something small that could be hidden in her fist, she handed it to the assistant. In gratitude for his help, she gave him a candy. It was just an ordinary candy with a sour taste, but Hyuk was genuinely happy to accept the gift. Thanking her, he declared that it was his favorite flavor, but he wasn't in a hurry to eat it right away. And again, he gave a strange explanation, saying that he would save the candy and eat it later. Ja-yu looked at him like he was an idiot, not understanding why the popular heartthrob was spouting such nonsense. But believing that he liked such candies, she gave him a couple more. Jae-hyuk tightly clutched the lollipops in his hand, wanting to believe that this was how their friendship began. After all, this girl, who seemed out of this world, had given him a few candies. Now he needed to somehow solidify the beginning of their acquaintance, so he asked for her number, explaining that he had the numbers of all his classmates, but not hers. For some reason, this request stunned the girl. She couldn't believe it, that this guy not only greeted her, but also helped her. And now he was asking for her number? For some time, which seemed like an eternity to him, Ja-yu thought. And then she said two numbers, 18, which in Korean sounds like a swear word, and the guy took it as an insult but pretended not to understand. For the first time, he experienced the bitterness of life, but he understood that he himself was to blame for it. His friends, watching him rack his brain over something, even decided that he was sick. But he himself understood that a person might not like it if some stranger started asking for their number. Although he never approached anyone first and had never been rejected in his life. But now he understood what happens if you live relying only on your looks. Until this moment, life had been easy. So he still grumbled that Ja-yu had started swearing when she could have just refused. And it's not clear to her why Jae-hyuk is so eager to befriend her. She tried to get an explanation from him, but he seemed not to hear her. And Sung-chan asked her to tell him about the rumors circulating about Ja-yu. So he heard from a student at Sumyeon Middle School that because of this girl, some student transferred to another school. There were rumors that Ja-yu stalked him, like some kind of stalker. And also, that guy was the only one who treated her well, but she tormented him. Almost all the students who studied at that school know about it. So-hee's story was heard by Hyuk too, but he seemed not to care, and she tried to convince him to stop being kind to Ja-yu. The guy didn't understand this attitude. This girl seemed like a good person to him. Then the teacher, Son Na-jung, entered the classroom and asked everyone to take their seats. Today was the last day they could sit wherever they wanted, and then they would sit according to the teacher's seating chart, which she showed them. The students didn't understand these changes and why they weren't allowed to sit as they pleased, especially since the semester had already started and the teacher could have waited until the end. But the woman decided not to seat couples together, especially two amorous ones. She separated into different corners. However, she jokingly promised to seat them together again when they got married. She was tired of students behaving like a herd of animals, and this way, they could make new friends. Then the teacher asked them to immediately change seats in the correct order. Some obeyed, while others tried to protest unsuccessfully. A red-haired girl approached Hyuk, asking for his desk number. He, unsuspecting, gave his number 25. Everyone wanted to sit with him, and everyone stared at the chart to find out his partner's number. Next to 25 was 18. An envious girl approached the teacher to look in the journal and see whose number it was. And while she was intently searching for the name, a girl whose number was 18 approached the desk. She knew him very well. Cha Hyuk was slightly taken aback when he saw the face of the person he was going to sit with. It was Cha Yu, and she silently took her seat without looking at anyone. The guy even felt awkward, although deep down he didn't mind. And then he looked at the table again, and it suddenly dawned on him. Ja Yu had meant her student number then, which meant he had simply misunderstood her. Glancing at her serious, straight-on face out of the corner of his eye, the guy was still plagued by doubts that she could really swear. It was hard to tell from her expression if she was angry or in a bad mood. Lost in thought, Chae-hyuk nervously clenched his fingers. He needed to somehow diffuse the situation. And as if nothing had happened, he commented with some surprise that they were now neighbors. To which Chae-yu, in a rather dry, quiet voice, as if from a tomb, merely repeated his words. She just couldn't express her emotions normally, and Hyuk decided that she was definitely angry. In fact, the girl herself was very nervous. She couldn't believe she was sitting with such a handsome man. Ja Yu tried to calm down, feeling like she was about to throw up from anxiety, and she started swallowing back the urge to vomit so she wouldn't look foolish later. And I also got distracted by other girls' conversation to stop thinking about it. Two more sat with disgruntled faces ready to leave school just to avoid sitting with each other. Everyone was chatting about something. Only Ja Yu and Hyuk sat silently, and she thought of saying something interesting. Introverts have this peculiarity. If the silence drags on, a strange feeling of guilt and obligation sets in. Zhao Yu had run out of candy, and she was wondering how to start a casual conversation. And as soon as she opened her mouth, uttering just one syllable, the guy immediately gave her his lively attention. Yu asked where he lived, but her gaze was as if she was about to ambush him in some alleyway. Guo So-hee was now sitting at the desk behind them. She could hear perfectly well, and Cha Yu's question seemed suspicious to her. The darkest thoughts began to race through her mind, as there were already all sorts of rumors about Yu. So-hee started thinking about how to prevent Hyuk from giving his address to this suspicious person, and she began poking him in the back with a pencil, trying to get his attention. But the guy deftly bent his arm behind his back and tightly squeezed the pencil with his fingers. Then, ignoring he confessed to Yu that he lived in Somnamdong. Thus, they had a short conversation about nothing, and to continue it, the guy asked where his deskmate lived. As it turned out, this girl lived in the same neighborhood, and it seemed strange to both of them that they had never seen each other there. It seemed the conversation could have ended there. Neither of them could think of the next question. But half a minute later, Ja Hyuk suggested they go home together today. Neither Ja Yu, nor especially So-hee, whose face even twisted, expected such a question. However, the dark-haired girl, without even thinking about the answer, readily agreed. After that, the jealous So-hee was so upset that she almost tore her hair out. And after classes, Hyuk admitted that he usually walks home, and Yu agreed to walk with him. And then, right in front of Namja, who was still sitting at her desk, So-hee somewhat nervously placed her bag, innocently stating that she would also go with them, while staring at Hyuk, which seemed strange to him because she had always taken the bus before. And Go reminded him how he had previously wanted to be friends, and that Yu would be more comfortable if there was a girl nearby. In fact, she had a cunning plan to prevent them from getting close, which she disguised as good intentions. And when Hyuk walked away, the other guy was surprised that Go would go with them because she doesn't like that person. From his perspective, So-hee's actions seemed foolish, but she stood her ground. Moreover, she felt sorry for Jae-hyuk and didn't want him to suffer because of Jae-yu, and she is ready to do everything possible to prevent that girl from enchanting him. Although in reality, she was afraid that after so much effort, she still wouldn't get this handsome guy. For 4 years, she had been clearing the path to him, and now, at first glance, she felt something was wrong. And the moment when Cha Yu asked for Hyuk's address seriously alarmed her. Sun Chan still didn't understand what she was trying to achieve. Hyuk had never escorted her the entire time, but she wasn't happy that he decided to befriend an unstable psychopath. This infuriated So-hee so much that she almost fainted. However, there was no time to lose now, and she quickly said goodbye to Chan, hoping to get rid of her hated rival forever during this walk. For a while, all three walked in silence, So-hee walking between Yoo and Hyuk. And then Namja suddenly asked for the classmate's name, and she gave her name, after which she clarified whether she had remembered the dark-haired girl's name correctly. She also admitted that she knew her name from a friend from Somyoung school. Cha-yu cast an unsuspecting glance at her classmate, and then she started staring at her feet again, lost in her thoughts. At that moment, Hyuk gave So-hee a reproachful look, as if she had blurted out something inappropriate. He also suggested they switch places, but she wasn't going to allow that, not even under threat of death. Go, in protest, waved her hands, not letting her friend take a single step towards Yoo. And she, watching the two of them, decided they were quite close. But continuing the conversation, she asked which school they were from, and Hyuk admitted he was from Jail. So-hee, meanwhile, continued to wave her hands, as if a gnat was flying nearby and annoying her. But that's how she tried to prevent Hyuk from even looking at Yoo, and Yoo was already tense. The strange thing is that these gnats didn't bother either her or Hyuk. So-hee continued to glance at her rival, trying not to show her indignation. But their classmates started to guess what was going on and came up with something. He took out his phone, intending to ask Namja for her phone number, but he never plucked up the courage and just clutched the phone in his hand. And then he asked what time Ja-yu usually wakes up in the mornings. The girl was confused, not understanding why he even needed such information. Hyuk suggested they go to school together tomorrow, and also wake each other up so they wouldn't oversleep. So-hee was barely holding back her nervousness, and Hyuk also suggested they meet at the bus stop at 8 in the morning. Namja readily agreed, admitting that she always leaves at that time too. Now the guy's heart was soaring again, as if he had successfully passed a difficult exam, because he had a great opportunity to exchange numbers. Still holding the phone with trembling fingers, he suggested they exchange numbers. Cha-yu agreed again, and So-hee even covered her face because it was disgusting to watch. Namja dictated her number, and Hyuk immediately sent her a message so she would save his number. The girl was surprised. She hadn't received a chat invitation in a very long time. This touched her so much that she widened her eyes to keep from crying. She felt a tremor in her hands and gripped her phone tighter so as not to drop it. And her whole appearance at that moment made So-hee even more convinced that she was not adequate. Go thought that Yoo didn't like it, and curses were practically begging to come out of her purple lips. That same evening, Namja still couldn't believe that it had happened. All this time, she hadn't let go of her phone to make sure that the message from Hyuk wasn't a dream. But she felt awkward calling him first, so she decided to wait for him to call her. Her much older brother, Nam Roy, who was 32 years old, asked her to focus on her food. Due to the large age difference, they weren't very close, but Yoo didn't argue with him. At the same time, she kept staring at her phone, waiting for the coveted call. Noticing that simply asking wasn't helping, Roy took the phone from his sister. But for her, it was now like tearing off her strong arm. The guy just asked her not to look at him with such a pitiful gaze, and she, shrugging her shoulders, nodded in agreement, although in the past, that used to work on him. Just as he was about to put the gadget down, an incoming message alert sounded. Both were surprised. Yoo couldn't believe she'd finally received it, and Roy couldn't believe anyone was messaging her at all. The older brother became curious about who could be messaging his sister. Besides, he didn't recognize the name that appeared on the lock screen. Moreover, Ja-yu has no friends and only uses her phone to check the time. Roy already thought it was spam, but didn't delete it, as he respects the teenager's personal space. And he promised to give her the gadget after she finished eating everything. A little later, Yoo, in her room, stared at the phone for a long time. It was as if she was afraid to read it, but in the end she opened the chat. Hyuk asked if she would mind taking a walk tomorrow morning. The girl was thrilled, but not by the question itself, but by the fact that this guy had messaged her first. They exchanged a few messages, agreeing to meet at 8 at the bus stop. Finally, wishing her good night, Jae-hyuk sent her a cute emoji, and Jae-yu had a strange feeling because she had also bought some, just in case. Next in the chat were several lively pictures with animals. Jae-yu even found it a little strange that Hyuk wasn't trying to end the conversation first. Grabbing her phone and pondering this question, she went to her older brother, who was still awake and diligently typing something on his laptop. With an inner sense, he felt someone's presence nearby and immediately turned his head. Ja-yu was peeking through the door crack, and with her messy hair in the dim light, she looked like a ghost. The guy was already used to her eccentric appearance, but he still got goosebumps every time she showed up like that. And he reminded her of his request to make some noise when she entered his room. The girl apologized, but she needed advice from a more experienced person. And he immediately declared that if it was about studies, he had already forgotten everything, even from university. Roy didn't even listen to what his sister wanted to ask him. He just immediately decided to politely turn her down so he wouldn't have to help with her homework. But Za-yu had a different problem. She couldn't end a conversation with a friend in a chat. Her brother decided that someone was stalking her in the chat, even after she left, and he asked to see all the correspondence to sort things out. When he saw a bunch of emojis they had sent to each other, he was stunned with surprise. But what worried Za-yu was that she couldn't find the right moment to end the conversation. Then her older brother put on a thoughtful expression, as it was a personal matter. Then he sent the subscriber a cat under a blanket with a request not to reply anymore. When Cha Hyuk read it, he decided that his classmate was offended. But he also didn't forget that it was always very difficult for her to understand, so she might be mistaken. And he sent her another emoji with the caption that this was the last one. But Cha-yu was suffering even more because that guy replied to her again. Hyuk didn't stop worrying either when suddenly his phone vibrated. It showed that it was Saw-hee, and he got even more nervous as he didn't want to talk to her right now. Still, he picked up the phone and asked what she needed at such a late hour. Go couldn't fall asleep until she knew that Cha-yu-hyuk would go to school tomorrow. And when he confirmed it, she lost all sleep. But he realized that Saw-hee wanted to go with them. The blonde started to act a little snobby, as if she wasn't interested, but she was choking with anger. And then she hinted that Nam Cha-yu had found out about his weakness and could harm him. The guy was tired of this nonsense and wanted to end the conversation, but Soha assured him that she was worried and also demanded that he not dare to hang up. Hyuk again explained that Ja-yu was not a villain at all and that he himself wanted to be friends with her. But that's exactly what Go didn't understand. She knew very well that he didn't like people. The handsome man had nothing to say to this. She hit the nail on the head. However, he doesn't like people, but this doesn't apply to a certain person. Realizing that she wouldn't be able to persuade him now, so he gave him the go-ahead to do as he pleased. She only warned him not to regret it later, when that girl's true nature was revealed. And a little later, both introverts, going to bed, simultaneously thought about each other. Nam Ja-yu put her phone next to her, although she didn't think he would text until morning. Yo Jae-hyuk lay down hugging a pillow. That evening, he really missed the warmth of a loved one. Soon, Ja-yu fell asleep and had a pleasant dream, but the guy suffered from insomnia for a long time. The next morning, Roy was having breakfast with his twin sister, Nambo Bae. While they were discussing who would look after Cha-yu until their parents arrived, she was running around the kitchen as if she had a propeller, not noticing that there was anyone else there. And such behavior unnerved her older brother and sister, with whom her relationship was awkward. But Bo Bae was surprised, seeing for the first time that this teenager moved so fast. Roy decided that Yu was just running late, but Bo was determined to somehow calm her sister down, and politely offered to give her a ride if she was late for school. Nam Ja-yu immediately refused, explaining that she would walk with her friend. Bo Bae's mouth actually dropped open. She'd sooner believe in aliens than in Yu making a friend. And her reaction made Ja-yu feel a little awkward, even though she hadn't done anything wrong. The older sister tried to explain herself, but the other was already about to leave. Arriving at the agreed-upon spot, the girl saw that Hyuk was not there. Worried that she was late, she checked the time, but she was the first to arrive. And she decided to wait for him, trying to calm her inner turmoil in the meantime. However, it was already 8:15, and her friend still hadn't arrived. Ja-yu felt completely disappointed, deciding that this guy had deceived her. Earlier that night, when Jae-hyuk couldn't sleep, he also remembered So-hee's words about how rumors don't just spread for no reason, and that a student transferred to another school because of you. But he decided to forget about it, since neither he personally nor Go had seen it with their own eyes. And in the morning, he woke up to the chirping of sparrows coming through the transom window. Otherwise, an ominous silence reigned throughout the apartment. Looking at his phone and seeing that it was already 3 minutes past 9, Hyuk realized he had overslept. He had never jumped out of bed so abruptly, nor had he ever gotten ready so quickly. Still, he needed to get dressed and walk to the bus stop, and that took time. On the way, he cursed So-hee. Because of her, he couldn't fall asleep for a long time and then overslept. Arriving at the spot, he saw that no one was there and realized that Ja-yu had already left alone. However, to be sure, he decided to check if she had sent him a message. He was scared to open his phone, but it had to be done. With trembling fingers, he swiped the screen, but there were no missed calls or messages. And then Hyuk thought that she might have overslept too and decided to call her. But then he saw her pale face under her black hair in the bus window. The girl noticed him too. She wanted to go up to him. The bus hadn't yet pulled away from the stop, and Cha Hyuk rushed inside. At that very moment, Cha-yu stepped out, but from a different door, as they were planning to walk. And only when the bus doors hissed shut behind her did she realize she was alone at the stop. Now their positions were reversed, as if fate had played a cruel trick on them. Cha Hyuk started yelling at the driver to stop because one more person hadn't gotten on the bus. And when the doors opened and closed again, they started looking for each other in the crowd. There were people like sardines in a can, but they managed to squeeze through, and Hyuk apologized for being late. Because then they would have walked, but Cha-yu wasn't angry. Now they were riding, but due to the large number of people, they had to squeeze together, which made them uncomfortable. The girl later confessed that she thought he had left first without waiting for her. But due to the noise, Hyuk didn't hear her words and asked her to repeat them. Then the guy who was standing next to him relayed every word to her, and Hyuk admitted that he had thought the same thing about her. But he was very glad that they met. Now, because of the noise, the girl didn't hear him. The same guy who was between them had to be the messenger again. And these two tried to speak less from then on, so as not to bother a stranger. But then another problem arose. The girls noticed Cha Hyuk's good looks, and they started discussing among themselves which school he might be from. Suddenly, the bus swayed slightly, and one girl almost fell onto Hyuk. Of course, she immediately apologized, but the guy assured her that everything was fine, and she was now over the moon with happiness that she had at least somehow touched such a handsome man. But he wasn't in the mood to be pleased that another fan of his face had appeared, and he squeezed closer to the door so that no one else would see his face. Clinging tightly to the handrail, he even felt awkward that Ja-yu was seeing all of this. She was just looking in his direction, but she didn't say anything. The guy understood from her expression that she wanted to say something, but Yu remained silent, and he began to push his way forward, grabbing the overhead handrail. The day was hot, and the smell of his sweat immediately spread through the bus. Hyuk felt a wave of nausea and turned away, while Ja-yu became even paler. She saw her friend barely holding back from throwing up on the passengers. But she couldn't do anything to help. All that was left was to wait for the stop. Soon the bus stopped, and the two of them were the first to rush to the door. Hyuk jumped out so fast, as if the devil himself was chasing him, and began to greedily gulp down fresh air. Ja-yu was nearby and hoped that her friend wasn't too badly hurt. But since he couldn't straighten up for a long time and was breathing heavily, she decided something was hurting him. She also thought he might be carsick and reached out her hand to him. However, Hyuk immediately put his hand out, as if he didn't want to be touched. He only stopped halfway and guiltily glanced at his girlfriend. The situation was awkward again, and each of them felt their own guilt. Ja-yu immediately pretended that she was just stretching her arm. She was just very ashamed that she had been too familiar with him. Sitting down next to him, the girl tried to express her sympathy. She also got him some water to make him feel better after the motion sickness. And so he wouldn't be shy, she assured him that she hadn't even touched the bottle yet. For authenticity, she started opening the lid so Hyuk would hear the characteristic sound. The guy was pleased by his classmate's care, and besides, he wasn't going to blame her for anything. It was just that the smell of sweat had gotten stuck between his teeth, and he was also nauseated by the large number of people. This caused another urge to turn his stomach inside out, and Hyuk barely held back. The girl became even more worried, not understanding what her friend was sick with. She even thought about calling the hospital or his parents. Still, Cha-yu asked him to tell her what was wrong. Then she would surely know what to do. Hyuk wanted to share his sorrow, but he felt like he would throw up as soon as he opened his mouth, and the mere thought of it made him feel even worse. But he had to do something, say something, to calm Ja-yu down. He was also worried that this girl might be late for class because of him. Then she would have problems if she accumulated penalty points. The choice was limited: open his mouth and throw up to avoid being late, or be late, but that would allow him not to appear before her in a bad state. And Hyuk blamed himself even more because if he had left earlier, none of this would have happened. But he could no longer stay on the bus to endure until the end. Even more so, he didn't like being in such a crowd. This started back in middle school, because people's interest wasn't just great, but excessively huge. First, girls started following him, sometimes praising him, sometimes asking for his phone number. And then boys started trying to befriend him, inviting him to hang out after classes. Even during lessons, students couldn't calm down without somehow bothering him. Many asked to take pictures with him and posted the photos on their pages. And the further it went, the larger the crowd of girls who wanted to marry him followed him. Guys also surrounded him, but only so that such a handsome man would adorn their company. After all, when approaching him, girls might notice the others too. Hyoku increasingly wanted to disappear somewhere, just so no one would bother him. He was fed up with all these fan persecutions, but people couldn't just walk past. One spring, in his 3rd year of study, he was invited to a class picnic. They were going to Neverland and wanted him to go with them. By that time, Go So-hee had also started chasing him, and he was giving her attention too. That day, the excessive attention was starting to make him sick, and he began to wave his hand just so no one would touch him, feeling that trouble was about to happen. At that moment, Go approached, not understanding what was happening with her friend. The guy didn't share his feelings with her, but it was then that he first experienced a mental disorder. He thought that with years it would normalize, but nothing changed. When girls approached him so intrusively, he felt nauseous, but he had to endure it and not talk about it so as not to seem strange. The guy just didn't want to attract attention, as it exhausted him greatly. So he noticed that he flinched every time she touched him, and she decided that he was disgusted by communicating with her, so he had to explain it somehow. So he guessed what was going on. After all, when Jae-hyuk was with friends, or when he was talking to someone, or smiling, his thoughts were always about one thing: he wanted to be alone. Therefore, when he first saw Nam Ja-yu, he felt something in common. He sat down next to her and said hello, but the girl didn't react because she was wearing headphones. And also, from her face, the guy understood that she had no desire to talk. However, he was curious why this classmate was always alone. Although he's sure she knows what others say about her, she always looks calm. It was as if she simply didn't care what others thought. Because of this, Ja-hyuk envied her, and he also wanted to befriend her. But now, as she stood beside him, he tried with all his might not to push her away. The situation was not in his favor. He felt completely screwed. It was very hard to breathe, and he didn't understand why he couldn't calm down today of all days. Trying to do something, anything. The guy started patting the back of his head, and when 2 girls walked past, he suddenly felt worse until they were gone. Ja-yu now began to guess that he felt bad because of people. This seemed very strange to her because this guy had always been popular. But now, she wanted to help him and offered to comb his hair on the bench at the bus stop. Hyuk sat with his back to the street, and Ja-yu leaned her back against him, and she suggested covering him this way until he felt better. After that, they can continue on foot together. The girl also placed water closer to him so he could drink if he wanted to. Hyuk didn't immediately reach for the bottle, but then he took a few sips, after which he felt the nausea slowly begin to recede. And to his friend's next question, he nodded that he felt a little better. But he didn't know how to explain everything to her so she wouldn't think he was strange. And besides, they were already late. So he only explained that he sometimes gets motion sickness, and today was one of those days. The next bus should be in 6 minutes, and he suggested they take it so they wouldn't be late. But Ja-yu suggested walking, as it was morning and the bus would be crowded anyway. Hyuk wanted to thank her. He realized that Yu had figured everything out. This made him even more awkward, and he didn't know how to choose his words. Then he still asked how she had understood his problem. But since she's an introvert, she felt that he also sometimes gets tired of people, especially since he's constantly surrounded by crowds who demand his attention. In the end, the guy admitted that this happens when there are too many people around. Their brief conversation was interrupted by the sound of an incoming message on Hyuk's phone. So he wrote to him, asking where he had disappeared to, and it seemed strange to her. After all, he's never late. But then it dawned on her that Hyuk was delayed because of you. For a moment, she wanted to grab that strange person by the throat, but then she heard voices. Downstairs, under the window, the teacher saw the two of them and asked Hyuk why he was late. So-hee was annoyed that the two came together, but she was glad that Hyuk was safe. Later, in physical education class, the students played dodgeball and needed to split into teams. Only Jae-yu was left. She was extra, as the number of participants would then be uneven. But she didn't care that they didn't want to invite her, especially since her mind was occupied with completely different thoughts. Ja-hyuk was hanging out near the guys, and it seemed like he was trying to stay close to Ja-yu. Besides, he was very active, and so he found it more than strange. And then this guy actually approached Yu to talk, which shocked the other girls. At the same time, Go decided that this classmate was up to her old tricks again. Of course, she understood that this handsome man wasn't necessarily meant for her, but she was willing to see anyone else with him, just not that gloomy person. Suddenly, Song-chan almost knocked So-hee off her feet, noticing how she froze. And he realized that what was bothering her was how much Jae-hyuk cared for Jae-yu. After all, not only he, but also the other guys, thought that So-hee and Hyuk were dating. They walked together, and she also came to his house to visit. And Sung-chan started teasing her that she and Hyuk were bride and groom. The girl still denied that they were dating, and to make Sung leave her alone, she threatened to throw a ball at him. However, the guy dodged, and the ball hit Ja-yu, who was standing behind him, right in the face. The blow was so strong that it split the girl's lip. Several drops of blood immediately fell onto the grass. Although So-hee was pleased to see such an outcome, she didn't do it on purpose and became worried. And Sung-chan called her a psychopath because if she had hit him with such force, his skull would have been fractured. Ja-hyuk immediately rushed to Ja-yu, and seeing her blood, he became very worried. At this time, others began to whisper that So-hee had deliberately hit her opponent. Still, the girls understood her, and the boys were curious if the fight would continue. Cha-hyuk then turned to the teacher, explaining that Cha-yu was injured by the ball. The teacher told them to take the injured girl to the infirmary, and So-hee was afraid that she would be punished now. Then she even peeked into the infirmary, trying to find out if Cha-yu was badly hurt. Through a small window, she saw the girl alone. The paramedic was nowhere to be found. And then, like in a horror movie, Ja-yu slowly turned her bloodied face towards her. It wasn't just a shiver that ran down So-hee's spine. She actually gasped for breath. And she burst in, assuring her that she hadn't hit her on purpose, but had only scared Yu, who then, lisping from her bitten tongue, assured her that she was fine and that Hyuk had gone to get ice. And for now, she can't even make herself a compress because the cabinet is closed. Trying to somehow atone for her guilt, So-hee took off her t-shirt so Yu could wipe away the blood. Ja-yu objected, and Go decided to take care of her herself. At the same time, she apologized again, explaining that she didn't hit her on purpose. However, Yu believed her and was more worried that So-hee's clothes would get dirty. At that moment, the paramedic came in, surprised that the girls weren't in class. Cha-yu was sitting with her back to the door, and suddenly, she sharply hugged Go, pressing tightly against her. She was shocked, but thought it was some kind of manifestation of female friendship. Since childhood, So-hee always found it easier to communicate with boys, but not because she liked them. It was just more comfortable for her that way. With boys, she could let her emotions out if something wasn't to her liking. At the same time, she would get nervous when she was among girls and was very shy. After entering middle school, sometimes girls would approach her first, and with one of them, who behaved politely, So-hee wanted to become friends. But that classmate had her own reason for approaching the new girl. She wanted to find out if Jae-hyuk had someone he was dating. So-hee felt disappointed because she was given attention for selfish reasons. Still hoping to make friends, she admitted that this guy was alone. However, her classmates were not in a hurry to befriend her, considering her a little strange because she mostly hangs out with boys. But she had this circle of friends since middle school, and it continued into high school. And somehow she confessed to Jae-hyuk that she wanted to make a female friend, because every day she only hangs out with him and only collects misunderstandings. But she couldn't share girl secrets with him, and she wanted to be friends with a girl. So-hee realizes that she doesn't have a sweet personality and isn't good at saying pleasant things. She also gets annoyed quickly and acts quite sharply. But if she had a friend, she's sure she would learn to behave well. The girl didn't want to believe that there was no one who would be interested in her, and not in Jae-hyuk, but suddenly, her classmates started paying attention to her, inviting her for ice cream, to gossip, and to take photos. So he thought they genuinely wanted to be friends, with no ulterior motives. But then they started asking her how she became friends with Jae-hyuk. Go realized that she wasn't actually the center of their attention, but she told them anyway. That they were from the same elementary school, and then went to middle school together. Her classmates, a little envious, asked her for more details, but she modestly explained that their friendship just happened naturally. And later, when she was already at home getting ready to rest, she saw messages in the group chat. They were condemning her there, saying she was acting like an important person and was actually in love with Hyuk. Only then did someone remind them that So-hee was also in the chat, and they needed to watch their words. In the end, Go never made a normal friend, and Ja-yu's hugs threw her off a bit. Still, she started asking why she had attacked her so sharply. It turned out that Ja-yu didn't want anyone to see her classmate in just a t-shirt. It was a display of care, but it was strange to So-hee that this person was the outcast from their class. Then she started to persuade her that there was nothing wrong with it, since only her arms were exposed. Still, the t-shirt was white, and Ja-yu was worried it might be see-through. With each passing second, So-hee became more and more shocked, not understanding why Yu was so kind. After all, she had always been rude to her, and in the end, she even "zero" her face with a ball. Yu's first expected reaction was that she would wish for Go's death, or when she starts to apologize, she will begin to threaten with cruel reprisal. But reality turned out to be completely unexpected, and So-hee again assured her that she was fine, especially since paramedic Bogan was a woman. She, in turn, was glad to see that the girls had become friends at the beginning of the school year. Then Bogan applied a special ointment to the injured girl's wound, but she was worried about her tongue. The girl was still lisping a little, and the paramedic recommended that she lie there until the end of the lesson. There were a couple of cots in the office. Ja-yu settled on one of them, and Guo sat beside her. And neither of them had much experience communicating, especially in such situations. But So-hee again said that she didn't hit her classmate on purpose. She just swung awkwardly, and Song also dodged. Ja-yu asked her not to worry because she never even thought of blaming her, and she understood that Go was also scared when she saw the blood. Still, So-hee's conscience bothered her, even though she used to dislike that girl. Besides, she didn't want the girl to report her and tried to show her care. And Ja-yu even promised that she would wash Go's t-shirt by tomorrow and bring it. With each word, this strange girl surprised So-hee more and more. It was unbearable for her to hear how kindly the other person treated her, so she went out into the hallway. There, she almost bumped into Jae-hyuk, who had already returned with a portion of ice. He realized that So-hee had seen Jae-yu and began asking about her condition. But then she suddenly shouted that their classmate was actually kind. What she saw in the infirmary was significantly different from all the rumors. Now Go realized that she was wrong and had suffered from all sorts of silly gossip herself. And then, because of these same rumors, she started judging her classmate. Now it's clear to her that Ja-hyuk has a reason why he wants to befriend Ja-yu. However, no matter how much So-hee thought about it now, she couldn't understand where those rumors came from. While she was actively thinking about it, Hyuk was watching her, and she abruptly sent him to the infirmary. The guy offered to go together, but she refused, not understanding why he was now uncomfortable. After all, they should already be friends, but Hyuk couldn't confirm that yet. After the unfortunate incident in the morning, he doubted that Ja-yu would want to talk to him, even though she claimed that everything was fine and she wasn't afraid of being a little late at all. And now, after Guo's words, he was curious about Ja-yu's mood. Then So-hee realized that something unpleasant had happened on the way to school. The guy admitted that there were a lot of people on the bus and it smelled unpleasant. Then he almost threw up. He also boasted about how Ja-yu empathized with him and covered for him later. Go advised him to go see Yu, talk to her, and thank her, and then their friendship would become clear. The guy was still worried. His vocabulary was good, but he didn't know what to say. And Go advised him to first thank her for her help that morning. Then he should ask about her condition and thank her again. After some discussion of the scenario, Hyuk entered Yu's room, explaining that he had brought her ice. But he noticed that she was lying with her eyes closed and decided that she had fallen asleep. She lay there so defenseless, with a slightly swollen cheek, and Hyuk didn't dare wake her to say everything he had planned. Instead, he carefully adjusted her blanket so quietly as not to disturb her, and he himself sat down on a distant chair, afraid to move so as not to make any noise. Then he felt it was impolite to watch a sleeping person and decided to move. But as soon as he rose from his chair, he heard Ja-yu begin to stir. The girl had only blacked out for a moment and then opened her eyes again. And now Hyuk felt even more awkward, and the words in his head got all mixed up again. According to the script, he was supposed to thank her and ask if she'd like to meet up on the weekend to study, but his tongue wouldn't obey him at all, and he asked Cha-yu if she wanted to date him. That's a characteristic of introverts. There's no point in a pre-prepared speech. For the girl, it came out of nowhere, like a very strange dream. And Ja-hyuk, realizing what he had blurted out, fell silent in a fright and even covered his mouth with his hands. Then he still started to make excuses, saying that he didn't mean that and Ja-yu misunderstood. Now she even felt a certain disappointment, and Hyuk inquired about her wound. He also offered ice, which he was still holding in his hands, and it had already begun to melt slightly. The guy himself pressed it against the girl's face, but the bag burst and she was drenched in cold water. Now Hyuk didn't know what to do with himself, feeling guilty and awkward. And while he was wiping the cold drops from her hair, she sat, staring blankly. And then suddenly, she slightly raised her head and he touched her cheek. He didn't do it on purpose, but now he was ready to execute himself. And nervously clutching his head, he began to expect that Cha-yu would start scolding him, but she just continued to sit with a calm face, like a wax figure. Cha-hyuk was nervous, trying to remember what was supposed to happen next, according to the script. All the more so, he finally had a chance to talk to her alone. But because of his strong excitement, it was now a complete mess. In the end, the guy just apologized, explaining that he was too nervous. And the girl didn't understand why, because there was no one else there but them. But that's exactly why he's worried. And instead of speaking normally, he's just rambling. They sat in silence for a while. Cha-yu expected him to say something else to her, but he remained silent, and she decided to leave herself if her presence made him uncomfortable. Cha-hyuk started whining again, saying that he wasn't worried about her personally, and the problem wasn't with her at all. Meanwhile, outside the infirmary door, Go was dying of curiosity about what was happening inside. She even tried to eavesdrop, but the bed was at the other end of the room, and she couldn't hear anything. Then he returned to the question of why there were such rumors about Cha-yu if she was kind, especially since the semester had just begun and bad gossip had already spread everywhere. It was as if someone was deliberately spreading them. As she was about to leave, he saw a dark-haired guy approaching, and he stared at her as if she had done something incomprehensible. Because she was propping up the door, he thought the infirmary was closed. A little confused, Go explained that it was open. The paramedic had just stepped out. She recognized this guy. It was the class president from the parallel class, Jong-gyul. Suddenly, at that moment, an excited scream was heard from the infirmary, and Jae-hyuk's excuses that he didn't mean that at all. So he was shocked, not understanding why that guy raised his voice at Ja-yu, and the dark-haired guy stared intently at the door, as if he was about to go and sort things out. Hyuk was still trying to explain that he had mixed up his words due to nervousness, and he's also worried that his presence might be bothering his classmate, for which he apologized, and then sincerely admitted that he wanted to be friends with her. At that moment, another girl entered, looking for Hyuk, because the bell was about to ring, and both who had been there earlier stared at her as if she had interrupted an important meeting. Ja-hyuk almost wanted to cry that this girl had entered at a very inconvenient moment. Then more visitors came in. Go was interested in how everything went, and Hyuk bitterly admitted that Ja-yu was silent and he was talking nonsense. But then both noticed that the dark-haired guy approached Yu. The two stared intently at each other, especially Gyul, as if waiting for an explanation from her. As it turned out, this headman and Ja-yu knew each other. It was easy for the others present to understand this when he greeted her. A slight smirk then appeared on his face, and he also narrowed his eyes. In Ja-yu's eyes, however, one could read surprise and a certain fear. So he and Hyuk immediately came closer, ready to defend her if needed. That guy took her hands, saying that this was the first time they had seen each other since graduating high school. But he knew that they had enrolled in the same school again. He just didn't know which class she was in. Then he put on a good-natured face, realizing that they were in neighboring classes. Still holding her hands, he asked why she couldn't be reached by phone. As this conversation went on, Hyuk felt a lump rise in his throat. He even felt jealous, because Gyul has a striking appearance and it's clear that he's close with you. Then Jung started asking why Ja was in the infirmary, worried that she was sick. The girl, without hiding anything, said that a ball had simply hit her in the face, and he became even more worried because everything could have ended terribly, and he hugged her shoulders. He also asked her to tell him in more detail how it all happened. Obviously, the guy decided that someone was hurting his girlfriend again, and Ja-yu immediately assured him that it was an accident, and everyone in her class was kind. But for some reason, the class monitor of the parallel class had doubts. At that moment, the bell for class rang, and he offered to walk Ja-yu, who, for some reason, couldn't even resist as he hugged her shoulders even tighter. From the outside, his actions seemed peaceful, but So-hee and Hyuk were somehow wary. However, for now, they only watched, hoping that this guy wouldn't do anything bad to you. When the first two left, Go asked who that guy even was, but Hyuk seemed not to hear her. His thoughts, as if in a delirium, repeated that they were close. At the same time, he also noticed that Ja-yu was uncomfortable with this person. In the corridor, Goel let her go, but the girl slowed down a bit, staying behind, and he turned to see why she was lagging. His gaze was so piercing, as if ordering her to move faster. After that, Ja-yu, like the most loyal soldier, quickened her pace, and a satisfied smile once again lit up the young man's face. However, he again stated that he was worried because he couldn't get in touch with her. But Ja-yu didn't even change her number. She just decided to pretend they didn't know each other. Because if he continues to talk to her, the other guys might hate him. In middle school, when she was blamed because of So-hee-ra, Jung-gyul defended her. Then rumors started that he would also suffer because of her, but he paid no attention to such things. And now he's curious about what problems there were in the infirmary with Jae-hyuk. He heard his raised voice, but Ja-yu assured him that the guy was actually very kind. He was just excited, and Gyul calmed down, but warned her to be careful, because Hyuk was a popular guy, and by associating with people like him, unpleasant rumors might start about her. Besides, a very similar situation happened at her previous school, and the girl couldn't argue with him, although she had already grown fond of Hyuk in her own way. Meanwhile, he was reproaching himself for not having a proper conversation with her. But now he doesn't know how to start a new conversation when it already ended in failure once. After all, this isn't a video that you can restart from the beginning and play again. At the same time, the guy perfectly understood that even with the next attempt, nothing would work out for him. Meanwhile, Ja-yu thought that Gyul was right and she should keep her distance. But this was the first time someone other than Hee-ra said they wanted to be friends with her. Both of them continued to sit at the same desk in class, but remained silent. The girl agreed that wherever Hyuk went, he attracted attention, and if any rumors started, she was sure that the problems would not be hers, but his. She didn't want Hyuk to get into trouble, just like Gyul, who they thought was also involved in an unpleasant story because of Ja-yu. And now, Jae-hyuk might find himself in a situation similar to Hee-ra's. All of this tormented Jae-yu. If it were up to her, she wouldn't even be sitting next to him now. But no matter how much their consciences bothered these two, they couldn't help but glance at each other. Although it looked accidental, subconsciously they were drawn to each other. And at the moment their eyes met, So-hee leaned in towards them like a third wheel. But she just advised Hyuk to smile, instead of sitting there like a statue. The guy raised his head and did as his friend advised him. But for a moment, it seemed to Ja-yu that the other girl who suffered in the past was standing before her. Feelings of guilt once again overwhelmed her entire being. She didn't want the same fate for Hyuk, and she turned away, trying not to look in his direction at all. And then she decided to move her desk a little further away, so as not to be so close to Hyuk. He was a little taken aback, not understanding why she had suddenly acted that way, and taking his table by the edges, he moved it closer to her. But it turned out not to be so simple. Ja-yu repeated what she had done, and already nervous, Hyuk once again joined their tables. Neither of them said a word, only exchanging questioning glances, and each of them tried to find a logical explanation for the other's actions. Eventually, the teacher noticed that their desks were moved and demanded they be put back. They had no choice, although Ja-yu wanted to sit in the far corner. Later, Guo asked Hyuk to tell her what happened between him and Yu, but he didn't know that this girl had suddenly started to distance herself from him, as if she was very uncomfortable with him, and Guo decided he had made some kind of mistake. She was right about that, but there were so many that he didn't know which one to think of first. And so he took it upon herself as a friendly obligation to talk to her and find everything out. A little later, she found Nam Ja-yu on the street and immediately approached her, but she flinched sharply as soon as Go touched her shoulder, and the next moment, she seemed to vanish, even though she was definitely there. Ja-yu was in a hurry to get away, understanding what her classmate wanted from her. In the end, So-hee couldn't catch up with her, and that really annoyed her. She and Hyuk clearly saw that the situation used to be normal, until she met that head student, and after that, she started avoiding Hyuk. And So-hee was angry, because she wanted to talk to Ja-yu not only about him, but she was worried that if they insisted on communicating, Yu would only suffer. Not only Go understood this, Hyuk did too, and that only made him feel worse. Then he started to get ready to have lunch alone, so that no one would bother him. He always eats alone, and so he said goodbye to him, going off to lunch. Later, Jae-hyuk sat on the steps, snacking on a gingerbread cookie and mineral water, and sadly, he realized there was nothing he could do if Jae-yu didn't want to be friends. Suddenly, he heard someone stir on the upper landing. Someone else was definitely sitting there too. Looking up, through the railing, he saw Jae-yu sitting just as lonely as he was on the steps. The guy started making excuses, saying he wasn't stalking her at all, just sat down here to have lunch. The next moment, he wanted to hear an answer from her, any answer, even if she had just rudely dismissed him. But the girl remained silent, only glancing at him. Risking everything, Hyuk came closer and sat next to her, giving her his shirt to cover her knees. He also admitted that he always eats here because he almost threw up in the cafeteria once due to the crowd. He started looking for places without people as soon as he entered school. But you didn't find it strange? Then she herself admitted that she was bullied in middle school, which caused her friends to suffer. Because of this, no one likes her, and she was very grateful when Hyuk was the first to approach her. Ja-yu will never forget that rainy day when he lent her his umbrella, and she is also very grateful for his confession to befriend her. But she is afraid that his communication with her will attract even more attention from the guys, and then it will be even harder for him to endure his feeling of discomfort. Now Hyuk understood that Yu was avoiding him not because of discomfort, but out of concern. He wished he could lie now and say that even so, he would be fine. However, he changed the subject, asking why she thought no one liked her. After all, he liked her, and it was quite possible he wasn't the only one in school who did. This guy's words were like honey to the soul, but Ja-yu thought differently. And he kept insisting that when others got to know her better, they would love her too. The guy also admitted that she was the first one to tell him he wasn't strange. He also didn't hide that he used to think like Ja-yu. When he was having a very hard time, so he helped him, which caused her problems. One day, Hyuk's friends started bothering him, inviting him to go to karaoke with them. He really didn't want to, and then So-hee came to his rescue just in time. She lied that the homeroom teacher was looking for him and asked him to go to the staff room. Naturally, his friends were angry that Go was interfering again and ruining their plans. Hyuk understood with gratitude that So-hee was having a hard time because of him, and he suggested keeping their distance so she wouldn't suffer anymore. But the girl objected because he himself was suffering, and that hurt her deeply. And she asked him to consider what hurt her more, worrying about a friend who was important to her, or the words of a valuable friend saying that he wished to distance himself from her. Hearing this story, Cha-yu now saw So-hee differently, and Cha-hyuk admitted that back then, he didn't understand Go's assertiveness, but now he can clearly see what she meant, because he feels the same way. And it doesn't hurt him at all that other guys will stare at him suspiciously. He's more worried that the girl he likes will avoid him. And while they were both having this conversation, So-hee was sitting quietly a little further down on the steps. But her stomach growling gave her away, and Hyuk immediately leaned over the railing, asking what she was doing there. And she grumbled that they were having such conversations where she could hear, and her legs had gone numb. In reality, she had hidden, thinking they were having a serious conversation, but it turned out to be touching. It made her want to cry, like from a drama, and her friends got worried if she was all right. And So-hee later apologized to Ja-yu for treating her badly before. It's just that, like many, she believed the rumors and thought she was strange. Ja-yu, however, was surprised, She hadn't heard Go speak ill of her, but she just didn't notice, and So he was touched again by how kind-hearted this girl was. She also liked how Yu could talk, and Yu admitted that she had prepared everything beforehand, which turned out to be true. She even showed a small cheat sheet on her palm. Everything she wanted to say to Jae-hyuk was written there in small print, and So he found this idea brilliant, so she also decided to reveal a secret. That Cha-hyuk is not what everyone thinks. In reality, he finds it very difficult in a crowd of people. And in middle school, when his popularity was growing, he went through a lot. From the outside, it might seem like Go worries excessively, as she's not even related to him. And then both Yu and Hyuk stated that they don't consider her concern intrusive at all. Quite the opposite, and Ja-yu would have done exactly the same in her place. Because showing care is not strange, but a very good deed. After all, if a friend is truly important, you want to protect them. So he was pleasantly surprised, and the two fell silent as if waiting for her approval. But now, all three of them awkwardly lowered their eyes, as if embarrassed by what had been said. Then So he asked why the two of them were only having a bun and milk for lunch, and she gave them an apple that she had gotten in the cafeteria, suggesting they split it in half. Hyuk held it by the stem with his fingers, trying to break it apart with his hands. He had enough strength, and very soon handed one of the halves to Cha-yu. The girl felt something incredible. It was the first time since her admission that she was having lunch with someone, and after eating only an apple and milk, she felt full. Meanwhile, a student from the parallel class came to their classroom and asked about Yo Cha-hyuk. One student suspiciously asked why he needed this guy. He wanted to know what he was like, and the other described him as handsome, but having trouble speaking. Moreover, he has absolutely no idea what games are. And Kang Ji-suk-hyuk seemed too boring and proper, as if preparing to become a celebrity. Ja-hyuk absolutely dislikes frank conversations, which usually bring people closer. As soon as someone approaches him with this topic, he immediately changes the subject. Then the guest stated that a certain Choi Jong-yeon from the graduating class asked if Hyuk had a girlfriend. And rumors say it's Ko So-hee, while others insist it's Nam Ja-yu. Hyuk's classmate was even jealous that he had two girlfriends, understanding what looks can do. Someone was surprised that Nam Ja-yu was in their class, and the guest said that she dated Song-bin in middle school. There was surprise again, because that guy was dating So Hae-ra, but they broke up because of Yu. But the strangest thing is that Ja-yu and Hae-ra were good friends. Kang Ji-suk even understood Song-bin because this girl was beautiful, like a doll. Then the stranger was asked to come a little later. Ja-yu would definitely be there, but they warned that she wasn't talkative and mostly ignored everyone. Suddenly, one guy remembered that this quiet girl used to date an older man. But in any case, like Cha-hyuk, she only uses her looks. At that moment, Hyuk himself quietly approached them and scared the living daylights out of the newcomer, as he wasn't expecting anyone behind him. He wanted to figure out why this guy had sneaked up so brazenly, but seeing his perfect beauty, he guessed that this was Yo Jae-hyuk. So, in a calm tone, he explained that they were just chatting. Kang Ji-suk also asked them not to sulk, because they only said that both of them are beautiful, and the fact that they both use their looks can be taken as a compliment. Cha-hyuk sighed heavily, shuffling his feet a little and placing both hands on his waist. He could have gotten angry, but he understood that these were just envious kids. Still, anger began to overcome him, even though he was holding himself back. And then, he simply walked past the guest, brushing his shoulder as he headed to class. He opened the door with his foot, though not hard enough to kick it down. Walking closer to the guys, he poked Sok's phone and rudely thanked him for the compliment. Then he stated that in reality, they knew nothing about Ja-yu, so they shouldn't be spouting nonsense. Even the girls started turning around, not understanding what had happened to Ja-hyuk. So he and Ja-yu also entered the classroom and stared questioningly in that direction. Go, who knew Hyuk well, couldn't understand what was happening with his face right now. And while he was glaring menacingly at the gossiper, she approached and started asking what was wrong. Kang Ji-suk tried to snap back, and the other one was already pushing him to be quiet. And then the teacher came in, shouting for everyone to immediately sit down. Cha-hyuk was still standing in an aggressive pose, with one hand behind his neck and the other on his waist. Go started asking him again, but he only suggested they go their separate ways. He himself still felt the tension. The words of those guys had really gotten to him. As a result, the handsome Hyuk spent the entire day in this state. So he followed him closely, trying to figure out if he was angry or not. She couldn't tell, as she had never seen him angry before. Then, unable to bear it any longer, she asked again what Jisuk had said to provoke him so much. The guy admitted that those students reproached him for using his looks, and he wasn't hurt by the comments about him, but by the fact that they spoke ill of Ja-yu. So-hee's interest grew, and she asked for details, knowing which she would be able to determine if it was bad or not, and if so, she would deal with those guys herself. Then Hyuk quietly whispered that she was accused of meeting for money. So-hee flared up, but Hyuk asked her to be quieter so Ja-yu wouldn't hear, who just came up to them. She was curious why they had such serious faces, but they immediately put on smiles, pretending that nothing had happened. And the dark-haired introvert suggested they all go home together today. As they left, some students looked after them with indignation. The girls couldn't believe that these three were friends, especially with Nam Ja-yu. The guys also looked after them, and Kang Ja-suk wanted to blurt something out, but his friend stopped him, and Yoo Jae-hyuk spoke to Yoo as loudly as possible, saying that they were also walking today. The girl didn't quite understand why he was shouting so much, but she didn't ask. And suddenly she announced that she would take the bus, and they would walk to the bus stop. So-hee and Hyuk were surprised, not understanding why Yoo decided to leave them, and they exchanged glances, letting each other know that this needed to change. They have time to come up with something while they walk to the bus stop. In the corridor that Ja-yu walks through every day, she had a lot of fun today, even though she can't cheer up So-hee and Hyuk to the same extent. Yet, before, she never thought she was lonely, but now it seems to her that she always was. So-hee suddenly looked at her friend and noticed a creepy smile on her face, which made her feel eerie again, and she thought, quote, _0, ___. Still, she took her hand and asked her to walk beside her, not stalk her like a maniac. Then Hyuk also addressed her, asking her not to stay silent next time if the guys start saying nasty things to her, because if she stays silent, others will start believing those rumors. Go supported her, saying that she should object if people are slandering her, and promised to beat up anyone who would hurt her. Hyuk even promised to help So-hee. The main thing was that Jae-yu herself shouldn't stay silent. The guy was still angry that those guys were saying nasty things without even knowing Namja. He just couldn't wrap his head around the idea that this girl could have dated an older man. They had already stepped outside when they saw a dark-haired man staring at them, and he was the one who looked at Ja-yu, called her baby, and invited her to get into the car. Her friends were stunned, not understanding who this rude person was and why he was being so disrespectful to Ja-yu. She herself was horrified. This was a secret she had so carefully hidden. This man had come to pick her up, and he also scolded her for not reading his messages. The girl objected, wanting to walk, but this guy was relentless. Then she plucked up her courage, but still quietly stated that she would go with her friends. But her refusal only angered the man more, and grabbing her by the hair, he began to shove her into the car, telling her to tell him later where the cameras were in the parking lot. But then, Cha-hyuk intercepted the girl and pulled her aside, glaring angrily at that guy. Then he led her further away to So-hee, intending to have a serious talk with that guy. Other students around also started bustling and whispering to call a teacher and the police. And that young man, who had a gangster-like face, started to get nervous. And So-hee immediately latched onto him, asking who he was. He was in no hurry to answer, and the girl's irritation grew. But leaving him, she asked Ja-yu to explain who this scoundrel was and why she allowed him such behavior. Ja-hyuk had already pulled out his phone, intending to call the police, but she suddenly got nervous and quietly asked him not to do that, explaining that this black-haired brute was actually her brother, Nam Kyung-yi. So-hee and Hyuk were in shock, because even if he was her brother, why was he hurting her? And Ja-yu walked up to him and explained that these guys were her classmates. Besides, they are her friends, and her brother was very surprised, doubting that she could make a friend. He and the students looked at each other suspiciously, but Kyung-yi was already calmer. Taking Ja-yu's hand, he even offered to drive them home. They agreed, but more to make sure that she would be fine on the way. For a while, silence reigned in the car, her brother still trying to process the new information. Then So-hee turned to her, still not believing that this was her relative. But then in the rearview mirror she saw his same creepy gaze, and her doubts vanished. And he suddenly offered the students to come over for dinner if they had time. Hyuk and Go were in a daze. Just recently he had been rude, and now he was so kind. And by their silence, the young man decided that they were indeed busy. And they immediately objected simultaneously, though they couldn't believe what was happening. Unlike them, Ja-yu couldn't believe that her friends would come to her house, especially since it was at her brother's invitation, and then she asked him not to call her __quote_0___ in public. Kyung-yi pretended not to hear and playfully ruffled her hair. At home, the first person they met was Bobae, who hadn't expected her brother to come for the weekend. His plans had changed, and he introduced his friends to his younger sister, who entered looking guilty. Bobae's mouth dropped open in surprise, thinking it was some kind of prank, and she was more than sure that her older brother had orchestrated it all. The Nam family turned out to be large. The eldest was Kyung-yi, with a gangster vibe, and he was a dentist. 3 years younger was his brother Roy, who was a lawyer, though he looked more like a swindler. Bobae is the same age as Roy the reporter, but she gives off a villainous vibe. The youngest was Ja-yu, who had the vibe of a rival goddess. She later showed her friends who came over a family photo of everyone together, and she also apologized for making them worry about her for no reason. Bobae squeezed into her room and offered them to stay the night there if their home was far, especially since tomorrow was a day off. But Ja-yu immediately asked her sister to leave, and she tightly closed the door. But the latter was curious to see her younger sister's friends. Then silence fell in the room. Ja wondered if she had done the right thing. After all, they don't have anything so secret that they need to close the door. And she also couldn't understand why her older brother had put her through such a test. She wanted to entertain her friends somehow, but a home is a place where you just relax. However, just sitting silently wasn't an option either, so she tried to come up with an activity. Meanwhile, Hyuk was thinking that this was his first time at a friend's house, and so he, for the first time, had come to someone else's house besides Hyuk's. Besides, she only went to his house because her mother asked her to bring snacks. At the same time, all three began to think about what they could do. But neither the room's owner nor her friends could come up with anything worthwhile. Although Ja-yu thought about getting books for studying, that's not interesting. Then she remembered that guests are usually treated to something delicious. And asking her friends to wait a bit, she prepared to go get some snacks. Besides, while her mouth was full of food, she wouldn't have to say anything. As soon as the girl opened the door, her brother and sister, who were curious, almost burst into the room. Kyung-yi immediately got out of it by offering to bring them something so his sister wouldn't have to bother. Bobae also picked up on his idea, as she hadn't had time to think of anything else. Ja-yu, realizing they were eavesdropping, immediately slammed the door shut again. But then, opening it slightly again, she asked them to bring snacks if they had any. The two, trying to catch a glimpse of something, promised to bring everything, and they asked the younger one to entertain her friends for now, and the door closed again. Hyuk and So-hee got a strange, eerie feeling from that conversation. Ja-yu understood their shock because her brothers and sister were much older, and it was also the first time she had brought anyone home. And Hyuk now wanted to apologize to her brother for being rude at school. So-hee shared the same opinion, as she had already intended to beat him up and had also called him an old man. Suddenly, his voice came from behind the door, saying that he wasn't offended by his uncle at all. And Ja-yu felt very awkward because her relatives were still eavesdropping. She apologized to her friends and was about to send her brother and sister away immediately. But Hyuk saw nothing wrong with it, even envying that they had such a good relationship. He is an only child and always envies those who have a brother or sister. It's the same situation for So-hee. Then Ja-yu told her what their age difference was. Kyung is 18 years older, and that explains why he calls her a baby. Meanwhile, Ja-yu's relatives were pacing outside the door. They tried not to eavesdrop, understanding that their sister's friends might not like it. Still, they were bursting with curiosity to find out how their little sister was doing. Then their brother Roy arrived, whom they had already written to, telling him that Ja-yu had friends over. At their request, he also bought snacks, although he wasn't sure if kids ate such things. But besides sweet rice and crackers, there was nothing else in the house, so they decided to give them snacks. Roy also bought some more different sweets that modern children hardly know about, and all three older ones curiously peeked to see if they would like such food. For the students, this was something new. Only Ja-yu recognized the old-fashioned cookies. She couldn't believe they still made them, but she ate them with pleasure. Seeing that only their sister had treats, the older ones became worried that they had problems. Roy managed to search the internet for a modern delicacy and suggested going to the store again. One of the popular ones is tanghulu, candied fruits. Meanwhile, Ja-yu couldn't understand why her friends weren't eating the snacks. Hyoku didn't want to seem rude, as he was looking at the food suspiciously. So he decided to at least try what it was, and the snacks seemed tasty to him. After him, Sohee took a bite. She liked it too, even though it was her first time eating something like that. And the older ones felt relieved, but now they need to think about what to make for dinner. Their younger sister ate vegetable soup and stew well. Still, such food was only for old folks at corporate parties. But no matter what they have to cook, they'll still have to go to the store. Suddenly, a clap of thunder boomed outside, startling the students a little. All of a sudden, a heavy downpour started outside. The thunderclaps were very frequent and accompanied by bright flashes of lightning. This caused a problem, as the older students still had to take the children home. But Kyung-yi assured them that his car would withstand such weather, and they could go after dinner. However, the TV reported a storm warning with subsequent floods. The presenter recommended refraining from going out for one's own safety. Roy received a message on his phone that the delivery had been canceled due to bad weather, and the elders realized that they were in much bigger trouble than they had initially thought. Since no food would be delivered to them, they would also have to go hungry. They called Yu and her friends, who had also already heard the weather forecast. For tomorrow, they promised that the rain will subside, and Kyung promised to take the guests when everything calms down. He also asked the kids to tell their parents about the situation, and Bobe suggested having something like a slumber party. She admitted that the food delivery was canceled due to the thunderstorm, but promised to figure something out. Sohee felt that this situation greatly upset Jae-yu's sister. And then, Hyuk came to the rescue, assuring them that he could come up with at least a simple dinner. Bobe was surprised, especially since there was nothing in the fridge. She also couldn't believe that he would be able to do anything with such clumsy hands. Kyung nudged her, suggesting that this was an opportunity for her sister to get closer to her friends. Ja-yu became curious about what they would cook, especially since they had nothing. Ah-so-hee was also surprised that Hyuk possessed cooking skills. In the end, he put on an apron and asked the others to just help him. The classmates agreed, and the older ones ran around to the neighbors. First, Hyuk told them to cut the onion into horizontal strips. So-hee took it upon herself, and he immediately warned her about the sharp knife, telling her to watch her fingers. Guessing that her hands weren't suited for this task, he decided to do it himself. Then he asked Ja-yu to throw the vegetables into the boiling water. The girl easily managed this simple task, but she threw in the garlic whole. She couldn't find the shredder, and Hyuk realized she was useless as an assistant. However, he didn't directly criticize her, but she still felt awkward. The guy tried to calm his irritation, which was helped by putting his hands on his hips. He just accepted that cooking and these two girls were incompatible. Then he asked them to add a brick of noodles to cook in the broth. And for extra flavor, he recommended adding an egg, and they threw it in whole. Hyuk was shocked, because it needed to be cracked, but he hadn't told them to do that. For a moment, he wanted to just kick the girls out of the kitchen before they burned anything else down. In the end, he finished the delicious ramen with garlic and green onions himself. But even with such a dish, he miscalculated, adding too much water. Hyuk took the blame for this and promised to improve his skills. It tasted like water used to rinse out leftover ramen, but the girls assured him that it was even good that way. After all, many spices can raise blood pressure, and he went to call the elders. They were sitting in the room and were curious, but they pretended not to be very interested. Roy was the first to speak, suggesting that the children needed something. Za-yu explained that they had prepared ramen and invited them to eat with them. Hyuk immediately admitted that it didn't taste very good because he had added a lot of water, and so he warned that there might also be a piece of eggshell. Still, the children tried to cook something so that no one would go hungry. The older ones seemed to have missed the warnings. They were pleasantly shocked by the children's care, and they were so touched that they didn't pay attention to the taste. And Kyung even gave them money so the children could buy something tasty later. Then Hyuk and So-hee explained that their homes were nearby and they could walk there. But the adults didn't want to let the children go out in such a downpour and asked them to stay overnight. The children were in shock. They hadn't even considered that they would have to spend the night together. But first, they needed to call their parents and inform them about the upcoming sleepover at a friend's house. So he was the first to call. Her mother immediately picked up the phone, who was worried that her daughter wasn't home yet and thought she had been playing somewhere late again. The girl explained that she was at a friend's place, but due to the heavy downpour, she would have to stay overnight. Mom thought of Jae-hyuk, but Go clarified that it was a different friend, and she became even more worried, as her daughter only befriended boys. Worried that Go might do something foolish, her mother wanted to come pick her up. And she didn't even immediately believe her when she explained that it was a girlfriend. It's just that Mom had never seen So-hee be friends with girls, and it's hard to convince her. But to prove she wasn't lying, Go suggested her mother talk to this friend. And Ja-yu, unable to avoid the conversation, timidly said hello on speakerphone. She also explained that due to the bad weather, everyone was advised to stay home. The woman heard a female voice on the phone, but still didn't believe it. And to be sure, she asked her daughter to call her back via video call. The girl refused, but her mother insisted, almost falling into hysterics. And Ja-yu, realizing it would be a video call, asked them to wait. Because she looked too homely, she quickly changed her clothes. When the screen window opened, she said hello, and Ja-hyuk also squeezed into the frame. Then Ja-yu introduced herself to Go's mother, explaining that they were classmates. The woman was delighted by her beauty and also worried that her parents might not approve. But Yu's parents are not here now. She is with her brothers and sister, who are already adults and have given permission. Then Ja-yu asked for permission for Guo to stay overnight, and of course, she read everything from a cheat sheet. So-hee's mother was not against it. Moreover, she invited her to visit whenever she wanted, promising to cook something delicious. At the end of the call, everyone was pleased with the successful conclusion. Now it was Cha-hyuk's turn to call his parents, but they are currently abroad, so it's unlikely they'll even answer if he calls. Cha-yu realized that this guy lives alone, as he has neither brothers nor sisters. It was already late, and so he suggested they change and go to bed. But then they realized that they still hadn't decided where exactly they would sleep. The children passed this task on to the adults, who insisted that they stay. There are 4 rooms in the house, but there are 6 of them, and it's better not to put the boy with the girls. And Roy recently caught a cold, so it's better not to sleep with him so you don't get sick. In the end, it was decided to place the older brothers in one room. Hyuk slept in a separate one. Jae-yu was with So-hee, and Bobae took the last room. Jae-yu was worried because it was her first time sleeping not alone, and So-hee was anxious because she was already shy around girls, and now she was sleeping with one of them. On top of everything, she couldn't fall asleep, feeling awkward because they had only been friends for one day. Hyuk also couldn't believe he was spending the night in the room of a friend he had just started getting to know. Eventually, under a flood of thoughts, everyone started to fall asleep, but the girls suddenly broke out in a sweat. Jae-hyuk, who had already passed out, woke up because it was too hot. It turns out that older brother Roy turned on the heater so the children wouldn't be cold. Hyuk, still sleepy, came out of the room, hoping it would be cooler in the living room. Because of the intense heat, he felt swollen and walked like a sleepwalker. Sitting down on the sofa there, he felt that the air in that room was fresher. But he made his way there in the dark and didn't even notice that Ja-yu was already sitting there. In the cooler room, Hyuk started to doze off again, resting his head on the sofa. Yu also fell asleep again in the same way, and they both leaned on each other. But it didn't end there. So he also woke up from the heat and crawled into the living room. In the darkness, especially since, like Hyuk, she was rubbing her eyes as she walked, she didn't notice anyone. By pure chance, she didn't sit on her friends, and instead sat on the floor next to the sofa. But Ja-yu, who was a light sleeper, heard someone rustling nearby, and opening her eyes, she was able to see a silhouette when flashes of lightning illuminated the room. But that wasn't the end of it. The eldest brother also went there. However, he wasn't as sleepy and noticed that someone was already there. He was more curious as to why these 3 children were all sitting there. Ja-yu carefully adjusted Hyuk and So-hee, who had leaned on her in their sleep. But Kyung-yi still couldn't understand why the children were uncomfortable staying on the beds. His younger sister asked him to be quiet so as not to wake anyone, and he agreed, although he had already planned to tease her the next day. From the other side of the room, Roy now emerged, and he was shocked to see his sister sitting there, almost cuddling with the others who were sleeping. But he was more concerned that they were in a cool room, and he couldn't allow that. Like a caring brother, he quickly returned with a warm blanket and carefully tucked all 3 of them in. Ja-yu had also fallen asleep by then. Bobae was used to sleeping in the heat, but she woke up wanting some water. When she went into the living room, she had the exact same initial reaction as her brothers. But she didn't like that the children were sleeping in an uncomfortable position, and she decided to do something about it. After a few quick adjustments, she laid all 3 of them down horizontally. All 3 elders were now happy that the children were more comfortable, but they soon started to toss and turn due to the cramped space and the hot blanket. Still, they slept like that until morning, and then woke up to Hyuk's scream, as he didn't understand why they were sleeping like that. Cha-yu, who was lying between them, now felt suffocated due to the cramped space. Hyuk started pulling the blanket to get out, but So-hee got tangled in it and started to be squeezed. Still, they had to get out somehow. Hyuk pulled harder and Go rolled over to the other side of the sofa. Pulling the others with them, they all fell to the floor with a crash, but at least they untangled themselves. Then the adults invited them for breakfast, having prepared rice. At the same time, they tried their best to make it more or less edible. It actually turned out that no one in this family was good at cooking. The adults used delivery services and could only manage to prepare a side dish. But the children were more concerned about something else now. How exactly they ended up sleeping together. Ja-yu was worried that when her friends leaned on her, she might drool. So-hee was worried about the smell, because she didn't dare to take a shower in someone else's house. And Hyuk had sleep habits and might put his leg on Ja-yu. Looking at the children, the adults decided that they didn't like the food, but these 3 felt awkward even when they started saying goodbye. Ja-yu invited them to visit again, although she doubted in her heart that they would want to. She noticed it on their faces, but the other 2 were thinking about something completely different. Kyung-hee, as promised, brought the car around to take the children home, and the young introvert kept looking after them for a long time, hoping that her friends would forgive her for this incident. On the way, Kyung realized that he hadn't asked their names due to the commotion. They also apologized for not greeting him properly and immediately introduced themselves. They already knew the older brother Yu's name, but he decided to introduce himself again. And then he politely thanked them for being friends with Ja-yu. Their parents are always busy at work, and the age difference between the children is large, so Yu grew up lonely. Kyung-hee was always worried that she had no friends, and this was the first time she had invited someone over. Listening to his older brother, Hyuk increasingly saw him as caring and kind, and he asked them to take care of his little sister. But Hyuk couldn't say that Yu felt lonely growing up. He himself had only recently met her, but he noticed that she loved her brothers and sister. Kyung-hee even got embarrassed, but he was very pleased to hear that. He was also glad that these 2 students were no longer as tense as they had been at first. When So-hee returned home, her mother had been awake for a long time, and without waiting for her daughter to take off her shoes, she began to ask how she had spent her time. She also worried if she had eaten and offered to make a salad. More than anything, the girl wanted to take a bath right now. But her mother wouldn't let up, curious about what games she played with her friends. And she was surprised to learn that they didn't have pillow fights, because that's a must at pajama parties. Regarding this, So-hee was afraid that she would hit too hard and accidentally kill Jae-yu. And then Mom suggested that they could also share secrets under the blanket. Go still didn't understand why they had to talk instead of going to sleep. Her mother was now upset, learning that they hadn't played anything at all. Finally breaking away from the questioning, So-hee went to her room. But her mother's words stung her, and she even tried to imagine what it would be like to share secrets. However, she doubted that Ja-yu would tell her a secret, even if she had one. She also didn't know who should start in such a case, and it all seemed strange to her. So she decided to write to Ja-yu, who had just sat down to do some studying. Hyuk, who heard the message, was also in this group chat. So-hee admitted that it was her first time eating snacks and ramen and suggested they do it again sometime. Ja-yu wrote that next time the brothers would buy something even tastier, and also promised fun games. Hyuk admitted that he also had fun, and they agreed to meet next weekend. Each of the 3 was pleased with this short exchange of messages. But still, each of them was worried that some awkwardness might not happen again. And Ja-yu couldn't believe that Guo was eating something like this for the first time, as if she wasn't allowed to at home. On Monday at school, it was hard not to notice how class monitor Gyul was greeted. The guys asked him not to run away during lunch and to play basketball with them, and the quite sociable guy accepted his friend's offer. But as he walked further down the corridor, his thoughts were occupied with something else entirely. Passing another classroom, he noticed Ja Yu sitting with Hyuk and So Hee, and he became curious as to what made her open up to communication, even if it was just a little. Later, the teacher announced that their class would be going to the amusement park on Thursday. He asked the class president and his assistant to bring all the signed consent forms tomorrow. Goel nodded in agreement, but it seemed he personally didn't like the idea of the whole class going on the trip. A friend from the back row asked if he would go with them or with the middle school, and he thought that the class, in which Ja Yu was also supposed to go, and he was very sorry that fate had assigned them to different classes. But in the end, he agreed to go with his class. And in another class, Cha Yu learned that Hyuk and So-hee did not on the trip. She started asking why, as she didn't want to go without them either, and the two of them exchanged glances, not knowing how to explain their decision. In the end, Cha Yu arrived at the amusement park alone, without them. The students started whispering. They had heard that Go and Hyuk weren't coming today, and now they thought they were just tired of this girl chasing them. The girls were very unhappy that Ja Hyuk wouldn't come because of Ja Yu, and she, hearing all these whispers, tried not to pay attention, but she was still sad. Everyone started having fun, but she was without the friends she had just made. But since she was already here, she decided to go on a ride, especially since you don't have to team up in groups here, and you can have fun alone. Having made up her mind, the girl participated in various attractions, and she went down the slides and on the carousels. She even flew on the airplane carousel. After many amusements, Ja Yu started to think about where else she could ride, and then a guy approached her, asking if she was alone here. He seemed harmless and invited Ja Yu to take a walk with him. The girl recognized this guy. His name is Kwon Oh-soo, and he was surprised that she knew him. Then he admitted that he had been watching her for some time and decided to keep her company. Ja Yu was a little surprised. Earlier, he had been in a group. She had seen him with Kyung-suk. The guy was slightly shocked again that she knew the names of other students, but they're in the same class. It's just that nobody knows her. Then Ja Yu apologized, thinking she had inconvenienced the boy, and he invited her to ride an attraction together that she hadn't ridden yet. The girl was worried that she wouldn't be able to do it and agreed to wait until he rode it himself. But Kwon stuck to her like a leech, saying it wasn't scary, and now he understood why no one hung out with her. She's annoying, and if she can't learn to behave, she won't be able to fit into society. Then Seok noticed Kwon and asked what he was doing with that particular person. And he, feigning innocence, explained that he was just talking to her. But the guys suddenly let slip that Kwon was acting this way after losing a bet. Now, Ja Yu understood that this guy wasn't inviting her for a ride for no reason. And he, still playing a role, asked her to wait while he went for a ride alone. However, before leaving, he asked her to buy him a churro. His request sounded arrogant, but Ja Yu thought she had only imagined it. In the end, she bought churros and sat on a bench to wait for Kwon. A few minutes later, the boy approached, all out of breath from the carousel, and when the girl offered him the churros, he asked why she hadn't bought a drink. Then he immediately reproached her, saying that's why she's considered stupid, because she can't think for herself. Almost falling with his next step, Kwon noticed his shoelaces were untied, and Ja Yu offered to hold his churros while he tied them. But he impudently expressed a desire to hold them himself and for Ja Yu to tie his shoelaces. The girl still hoped that this guy hadn't come to mock her. At that moment, a dark-haired guy in a cap bit into his churro. Moreover, he took all the snacks and began to eat them with appetite, while Kwon started to get angry. Then, the one who had approached, after finishing everything, lifted his cap, revealing his face. It was Jung Gyol, who appeared just in time, and ignoring the arrogant Kwon, he turned to Ja Yu, asking why she was here alone. He also praised the churros and asked where they were sold. The girl started to explain, but Kwon interrupted, grumbling that Gyol was eating someone else's food. Jung looked at him like an idiot and pointed out that Ja Yu was holding the food. He didn't even consider that it wasn't her food, but now he was ready to pay for it, asking the price. Kwon stammered, admitting that Ja Yu had bought him the churros, and Gyol was surprised that she spent so much on others. The girl began to assure him that it wasn't true at all, which led Gyol to another thought. He understood that this bully was extorting money from his classmate. He also suspected that Kwon Oh-soo was involved in other school violence incidents. Gyol didn't like that at all, and he threatened to tell the teacher everything. Just then, Jung's friends arrived, and he asked them for help, loudly explaining that this creepy guy was extorting money from his girlfriend. The guys hadn't quite grasped the situation yet, but they understood a fight was brewing. Other students passing by also noticed that something was amiss, and only Yu was worried, praying for all of this to end quickly. Trying to do something, she covered Gael's mouth with her hand as soon as he wanted to speak again. Taking advantage of the moment, before the crowd surrounded him, Kwan was about to slip away, and Gael, pushing away Yu's hand, demanded that he return, because they weren't finished yet. However, the bully disappeared from sight, and Jung was even glad of that. But he looked reproachfully at Yu, who allowed herself to be treated that way, although he perfectly remembered that she had always been so kind and trusting. They first met in middle school, but even then he had noticed her. Many people tried to take advantage of Yu's character, even girls. With an innocent look, they asked her to lend them money for about a week, but the debts were never repaid, and Gael watched as Yu forgave it. They asked the girl not only for money, but even for her sports uniform. As a result, Yu herself came to physical education class without a uniform and got a reprimand from the teacher. She was the quietest and most trusting in the class, and then Gil approached her. That day she stayed on duty, as the others had supposedly left on errands. Lee Jong explained that they were actually having fun at karaoke, and she was being used. Being sociable and having many friends, he was bewildered by her foolishness, but he felt sorry that she was being used and couldn't help but worry about her. Even when she was collecting balls after PE, he explained that it was the duty student's job. But the girl herself wanted to tidy up so that the balls wouldn't be lying on the floor. And the further it went, the harder it was for him to believe that such a person even existed. Worried about this girl, Goel felt anxious and was afraid that she would disappear. The guy often asked Yu not to do things that were not part of her duties, and if she feels that the money won't be returned, then she shouldn't lend it at all. She also needs to learn to say no when someone bothers her with stupid requests. But the girl remained herself, and Goel took it upon himself to somehow protect her from enemies. He didn't understand why she was so foolish, as if she lacked self-respect. And this girl never seemed to him like someone who could ever do anything bad. For 3 years in the same class, Goel wondered, thinking he had fallen in love with her. After all, he is always worried about her, and that's what happens when you're in love. But in the end, Yu disappointed him, and he only got stress and reflux disease. And after graduating from high school, Jung-gyul lost touch with her, and he thought he would no longer deal with someone who was too kind even for her own good. However, now on the ride, Goel realized that this was only the beginning. His friends who had approached were somewhat surprised that this was his girlfriend. Rumors had also reached them that she had been dating an older man, and they also knew that in high school, she had been a stalker. As it turned out, Gelyu knew nothing about the rumors concerning the man, and he didn't understand why Yu was still silent, even after hearing everything. From the outside, she seemed completely calm, as if nothing bothered her, and it infuriated Gelyu that she wasn't trying to defend herself at all. His friends then started saying goodbye, wishing him a good time with the girl, who began asking him to leave with his comrades and not stay with her. But the guy pretended he hadn't heard her at all, and only asked what she would like to ride. He was still angry, of course, but everyone expresses anger differently. In the case of Yo Jae-hyuk, he can't keep his hands still when he's nervous. Go So-hee clenches her fists, and her facial expression starts to resemble an angry Rambo. Nam Jae-yu didn't show any significant differences from his everyday demeanor, but when Jong-gyul gets angry, his face brightens and his eyes literally glow. Cha-yu had already learned these signs of his, but still didn't understand why he was angry. And the guy explained to her that to get help from someone, she had to start talking. Then he asked why she was alone and where Cha-hyuk was with that other girl. Goel noticed that lately they were always together, but today she was left alone. Ja-yu immediately retorted that no one had abandoned her. It's just that her friends couldn't come today due to certain circumstances. Still, the guy was surprised that her friends sent Yu alone, knowing about her problems. For a moment, the girl felt hurt that Gyul was accusing them without knowing the reason. The thing is, back in middle school, Cha-hyuk fainted on a ride. When So-hee told Cha-yu about it, she immediately became worried, and the guy started to reassure her that it wasn't that serious. Still, he was barely breathing then, and sweat was pouring off him in streams. So-hee was very scared then, thinking he was about to kick the bucket, and she didn't leave his side for a second, asking where it hurt and how she could help. Since then, Jae-hyuk avoids amusement rides, and Cha-yu understood everything because he felt bad even on the bus, and here it was a whole park. So he was really ready to go with Cha-yu so she wouldn't be alone. But she refused, assuring that nothing terrible would happen to her. She only felt sorry that Hyuk wouldn't be able to have fun properly because of his phobia. Now, standing before Goel, Ja-yu couldn't tell him that reason, but she also didn't want him to misunderstand her, and that tormented her. And while she was searching for the right words, the guy became convinced that she had been stood up. He couldn't believe that he had to face this stupid situation again. Gyo would have liked to blurt out that Ja-yu is a red-headed stupid radish. But he also can't say rudely and sharply that she's a fool because she doesn't see that she's been abandoned. Now he was experiencing the same internal conflict as Ja-yu. In the end, he just invited her to ride together instead of standing around like two lonely souls. A message was sent to the girl, but she hadn't read it yet, and she didn't know that her friends, So-hee and Jae-hyuk, had also come to the park. Go kept worrying about her friend and asked him to tell her immediately if he started feeling bad. But the boy was feeling fine for now, probably because he hadn't been here in a long time. These two decided to come so their friend wouldn't be riding alone. But the park was big, and it was difficult to find her, so Hyuk suggested calling. Although if she was riding right then, she might not hear, and Go suggested asking classmates. And then Ja-hyuk noticed that huge crowds were walking around. He immediately felt uneasy, but he tried to keep himself in check. And trying to stay away from everyone, he and Go went on. The unfamiliar girls immediately noticed him and were delighted by his beauty. Some even didn't hesitate to approach him and ask for his phone number. Jae-hyuk's nightmare began to manifest in reality again, and he asked to be left alone. But the girls wouldn't give up, even offering to ride with them, and so he immediately stepped in to defend him, stating that they weren't going to ride, and people didn't understand what they were doing in the park then. By this point, Hyuk felt so unwell that he sat down completely hunched over. And now the idea of coming here didn't seem so good to him, but he was thinking of Ja-yu. Caring, so he began to comfort him and asked him to put on his hood so he would see fewer people. And they once again took detours, where there were fewer people, but whispers about his beauty and tall stature still reached them. Eventually, the guy found a lonely bench and decided to sit there for a bit. So he understood him, but asked him to walk a little more, because the sooner they found Jae-yu, the sooner they could leave. And Jae-hyuk started doing breathing exercises that were supposed to help him calm down, but instead of relief, he only felt a bout of nausea. His body was numb, his fingers were cold, and his tongue was completely numb. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw people staring at him, their silhouettes beginning to blur. So he, who was reaching out to him, now also looked like something unimaginable. Cha-hyuk felt so bad now that he didn't know what to do with himself. And then Cha-yu, who came with Jung-gyul, noticed him. The girl was surprised to see him here, considering his fear of crowds, and so he, trying to lighten the mood, admitted that they had prepared a surprise. But it didn't seem like a pleasant surprise to Cha-yu. Just look at Hyuk. Her partner became curious as to why they were here if they had circumstances. The girl was confused, not knowing how to explain it all even to herself. But she immediately knelt down to Hyuk, who was bent over in three, asking what was wrong with him, and so admitted that until recently he had been fine. Only recently had he started feeling bad. They came here because they didn't want their friend to be alone. Realizing what was happening, Zayu began to urge Ka to leave quickly. However, the guy was trembling so much that he probably didn't hear her. Yu had never seen him like this. It seemed like he was about to have some kind of fit. Still, she guessed that his attack was because he found himself in a crowd of people, but it was still unclear to her why he felt unwell in a crowded place. The girl decided to put herself in his shoes to try and understand. The truth is, there are always people around who stare intently at him, and Cha-yu asked Gyul to help fix the situation somehow, and he came up with a slightly silly, even crazy idea. Within a few minutes, an announcement was made in the park that children were being sought. One of them, Cha-yu, with red balloons. The second missing child was named Jong-gyul, with a pink headband on his head. These two dressed up like this on purpose, and it started to attract people's attention to them. Goel felt like an idiot, but he went along with it to help Ja-yu, and she herself was a little embarrassed that everyone was staring at her and asking all sorts of questions. But she endured it, as this was now the only way to help her friend. and to sort out the disappearance of the children, so he later approached the officer on duty and introduced herself as their older sister. The announcement was no longer playing, but people were still staring at these strangely dressed children, and so he quickly returned to Ja-hyuk to tell him the good news, that no one was staring at him anymore, and in fact, it was as if no one noticed him. The guy heard his girlfriend, but he was still scared to look up, and when he finally did, the first thing he saw was Ja-yu with huge red balloons, which clearly showed that she just wanted to sink into the ground right now. Ja-yu stood all red, embarrassed that Hyuk saw her like that, and he was already feeling better. The nausea had receded, now something else was bothering him. He didn't understand why Ja-yu and her friend were doing such strange nonsense. What they saw shocked not only him, so he also stood there with her mouth open. And Ja-yu was signaling them to quickly get out of there before anyone saw them. Gyul still asked for an explanation as to why Jae-hyuk was here if he wasn't planning on coming. And to get him off her back about it, Jae-yu explained that it was Hyuk's personal business. The guy was stunned, as if she had proven to him that the earth was flat. After all, he was standing there with a headband on, and all she cared about was Hyuk's personal life. He's hurt that his personal life, apparently, means nothing to her. However, Cha-yu couldn't tell him the truth and simply thanked him. Meanwhile, So-hee started urging Cha-hyuk to get out of there. But the guy objected because they came for Cha-yu and couldn't leave her there. And the girl was already angry, not understanding why he didn't care about his condition. The guy looked back at Yu, and she herself asked him to leave quickly. The crowd started moving towards him again, and he shouted that he would wait for her at the exit. In the end, they started shouting at each other, just like in an apocalypse movie. We had to wait outside the park for about 30 minutes, until Ja-yu appeared on the horizon and Ja-hyuk brightened up. The girl looked disheveled after the rides and could barely stand. Only now did Hyuk notice that the guy next to her was the one he had seen in the infirmary. But Ja-yu was more concerned about her friend's condition and advised them to leave before a crowd gathered. But Jung-gyul suddenly stopped her, reminding her that they needed to check in with the teacher. After all, the homeroom teacher had asked everyone to gather at a specific time. Ja-yu had completely forgotten about it, but she didn't want to go back. But Gyul didn't give up, hurrying them along before time ran out. And Hyoku remarked that the relationships between the students in their class weren't very good as it was. And he and So-hee shouldn't have treated Yu like that, even though they weren't that close yet. Yo Jae-hyuk was indignant, but he realized that this guy was speaking the truth. And he had already put his arm around Ja-yu's shoulders and said goodbye to them until they met at school. At that moment, Hyuk felt as if Yu herself had abandoned him. And what bothered him more was that some guy was hugging her, even though she was essentially nobody to him. Hyuk couldn't catch up to her either, as they were moving further into the crowd. But to go back there again, for him, was worse than any nightmare. Moreover, he was infuriated by Gol's words that he and Ja-yu were not close. Then So-hee brought him out of his stupor, asking what to do now. The guy wanted to somehow bring his classmate back, but his feet were glued to the spot. And all he could do was shout after her that he and Ja-yu were very close. At the same time, he started to recall what they had done that people in close relationships do, and he screamed at the top of his lungs that they had slept together. And upon hearing this, Ja-yu almost died on the spot. And Jung-gyul, who hadn't understood much before, was now completely dumbfounded. So-hee was no less shocked. It seemed to her that she didn't know something. Ja-yu and Gyul were now frozen in place, processing what they had heard. Meanwhile, Hyuk was waiting for her reaction, and his companion now craved an explanation. And only then did the guy realize that his words might not have sounded at all as he truly meant them. He blurted out something strange again, and started explaining when the two of them turned to him. Hyuk stated that he and Cha-yu hadn't planned it, as they had only recently started talking. All of this happened because of the rain, and Hyuk thinks it was sudden for her and now burdens her. But he's sure that after this, they became closer. And also, it was his first time, and he messed up. Gyul was afraid to imagine exactly how it all happened. Now a new portion of anger accumulated in him, and he headed towards Cha-hyuk, who was bewildered, not understanding why he was looking as if he wanted to tear him apart. Coming closer, Gyul mentally hit this suitor properly. In reality, he grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and dragged him away from people. Just around the corner, he demanded an explanation as to why Hyuk was leading to him dating Cha-yu. Now Hyuk was surprised because he didn't mean that at all and told it as it was. But Jong continued to stare with a piercing gaze, as if in an interrogation. Although anyone in his place hearing something like that would be sure that these two were dating, Ja-hyuk started to object, and So-hee now began to guess who this guy was. She had heard about Ja-yu's classmate from middle school, and from his curiosity, she realized it was him. At the same time, Hyuk explained that he hadn't dumped Ja-yu and wasn't dating her, but that they were just friends. Then he added that So-hee slept with them, but that doesn't mean the girls are dating. Hyuk's speech seemed stranger and stranger to Gyul. He didn't understand how they could do that if they weren't dating. But what seemed even more absurd to him was that So-hee was also involved in it. Meanwhile, Chae-yu herself was only thinking about the fact that Chae-hyuk had acknowledged her as a friend. Then Goel told him that this was not abroad, and that he still couldn't go around telling everyone about it. Hyuk felt guilty and apologized to Cha-yu, but she wasn't angry. Then he asked how Goel had guessed that he had lived in Canada as a child. Now, in Jong's eyes, he seemed like a complete idiot, which made him really want to hit him. His anger was again noticed by Ja-yu, and she didn't understand why he was angry now. She thought it was because she was nearby, as it always had been. Although back then he was yelling at others for her doing their work, and if he did laugh near her, it wasn't because he was having fun. Jong-gyul also very often looked tired, but whenever something happened to her, she always saw Gyul's back in front of her, so she decided to change in high school, even if she had to do everything alone. That's why she didn't reply to his messages, so he wouldn't have to deal with it again. And now the girl asked him not to worry about her, and also not to be angry about it. She also admitted that she enjoyed sleeping with Hyuk, and that although it was her first time too, she felt comfortable. And Ja-yu also admitted that it would be great if Gyul joined them. His eyes widened again, and So-hee was speechless. Only Ja-yu was pleased, because for the first time she said what she thought without a cheat sheet. At that moment, Galya's friend started calling him, reminding him that it was time to get ready. But for him, that wasn't the main thing right now. It was important for him to sort out this Santa Barbara. The guy couldn't believe his ears after Ja-yu's confession. In the end, he left with his friends, abruptly saying that he would talk to her at school. When he left, silence fell between the three of them. This was the moment when the introverts began their process of self-reflection. Hyuk blamed himself for not thinking that Yu might be here with a friend and that they had come for nothing. So-hee was trying to understand what that strange conversation was all about. At the same time, Ja-yu was burning with shame, realizing that people had been watching them all this time. Then she was the first to speak up, asking why they had come here. After all, they were going to school, and Hyuk explained that they had already finished there. And then, at the same time, So-hee and Hyuk confessed that they came so Yu wouldn't feel lonely. Silence fell again, as if everyone was processing the information. Then, Ja-yu asked them to wait while she clocked out, and they could go home together. When the girl returned, they kept to the side where fewer people walked. They didn't have to walk long. Hyuk had already called a taxi and it had arrived. Now that they were alone in the car, it should have been more comfortable, but there was still tension. And then, Ja-yu suddenly moved even closer to So-hee, which made the guy decide that she was uncomfortable right now because it was cramped. But she, on the contrary, wanted him to have more space. However, now Go felt cramped. In addition, Za-yu deliberately moved as far away as possible, just so Hyuk would be comfortable. He didn't quite understand why she was doing that. And now, she completely squeezed her friend who was still in a state of shock. But now, Ja-hyuk felt uncomfortable, because he was taking up so much space and the girls had to squeeze together. And each for their own reason, they were silent for a while on the road. Then, Ja-yu noticed the meter on the car's dashboard. The sum was already large, and by the time they arrived, it would exceed 50,000 won. At that moment, she realized that Park Hyuk and So-hee had also arrived by taxi. After all, he couldn't take the bus, so he had to spend money. After a little more time, the guy asked the driver to stop, and when it parked, the students got out of the car. Cha-hyuk looked more cheerful now. Even his face had brightened, and Cha-yu was glad to notice that her friend was much more comfortable now. So-hee, glancing at her phone, announced that she had to go, as class was starting soon. They said goodbye, and Ja-yu wished her to be careful on the road, but now that she was alone with Hyuk, she felt awkward, and so did he. Although they hadn't talked much even with So-hee there, it would have been better if she had stayed. Then the guy still offered to walk his friend home, but she objected. wishing, on the contrary, to walk him, as she would feel calmer when she saw him enter the house. Jae-hyuk agreed, but on the way, he wondered who the guy with Jae-yu was. It was awkward for him to ask directly, as it would look like he was interfering. Still, he plucked up the courage and voiced his question, and the girl explained that he was a former classmate from middle school. Besides, he was the kindest and best person she knew. Jae-hyuk remembered how harmoniously they stood next to each other and decided they were close friends, and he felt a little envious that he didn't have such a relationship with this girl. When they reached his house, he asked her to return home quickly because it would soon be dark. Then, entering inside, he greeted the empty apartment, and without even taking off his outerwear, he flopped down on the threshold, feeling tired. His face even turned pale again, and he wanted to fall asleep right away, if only for a short while. Meanwhile, on her way back, Cha-yu remembered that she hadn't given Hyuk money for the taxi. Upon returning, she noticed the door was open, but asked for permission to enter. There was no answer, but as soon as she crossed the threshold, she immediately started talking about the money. However, seeing Hyuk lying on the floor, she was speechless. Out of fright, he started to explain that he had sat down to take off his shoes and lay down for a minute. He was also curious how Yu came in. He had forgotten that he hadn't locked the door. However, the girl didn't embarrass him at all. On the contrary, she lay down next to him, explaining that she sometimes does the same, because if it's a hard day, it's even difficult to take off your shoes. And today was a hard day, and yet she was glad to see her friends. Even if they didn't have a proper walk together, she was still happy to see them. While Ja-yu was talking, Hyuk silently watched her face. Whether from fatigue or the atmosphere, his heart began to beat faster. The guy couldn't understand what was wrong with him. He had never felt anything like this before. After a short while, Ja-yu returned home and approached Kyung for advice. She wanted to learn about a certain illness and described Hyuk's symptoms. She also asked how dangerous it was and if it could be cured in a hospital. The older brother decided that his sister was talking about herself and became worried. But trying to keep a straight face, he asked her to tell him when it started for her. He understood what she was talking about, but Ja-yu immediately clarified that she was talking about her friend. Kyung, out of her few friends, immediately identified the candidates. However, for the dentist, answering a question about psychiatry was a difficult task. It was not his specialty, but he could say that the symptoms were related to a mental illness. It could be a phobia or some kind of anxiety disorder. The older brother asked if Yu had heard about panic disorder, and he asked her to imagine that she had fallen into a deep sea where her feet could not reach the bottom. By nature, a person cannot breathe underwater, and with each breath, they feel death approaching. A person suffering from a panic disorder experiences this every time they have such an attack. And if this is indeed the case, then you absolutely must go to the hospital. Later, Ja-yu decided to try breathing underwater in the bathtub to understand that feeling. Now she understood Hyuk, who was all alone because his parents were abroad. The girl wanted to help him in a friendly way, somehow. The next day, she found him near her house, sitting alone on the parapet. She became curious as to why he was sitting here instead of going to class. The boy decided to wait for her so they could go to school together. He also wanted to talk to her on the way, but Cha-yu didn't hear those words over the noise of the cars. Cha-hyuk asked her not to worry, assuring her that it wasn't that important. Now, Cha-yu was walking to school with him for the second time, but now she was thinking about her brother's words. He had said that this illness was not to be trifled with, and she wanted to discuss it with Hyuk before school. Before she could open her mouth, he asked her how she got home yesterday, and he also admitted that he hadn't properly thanked her yesterday. At that moment, two people walked past them, and Ja immediately shielded her friend with her body. He even became curious as to why she was suddenly acting this way. And then, she suddenly crossed to the other side, calling him to come with her, as there was no one there. The whole way she was intently looking around to make sure no one else came close. And Ja-hyuk, who wanted to have a serious talk with this girl, just couldn't find the right moment, and that made him feel very uneasy. In the end, they arrived at school safe and sound, but when they entered the classroom, it was incredibly noisy, more than ever before. Ja-yu didn't understand what was happening, and So-hee wasn't in her seat either. Although her backpack was there, Yu decided that her friend had just stepped out for a moment. Then she noticed a small note rolled into an envelope on the desk. The girl became curious and unrolled it. This is a note from Jong-gyul, who asked them to come to the rooftop immediately. Jae-hyuk also read the alarming text, and both of them had a terrible premonition. Hoping until the last moment that nothing serious had happened, they quickly reached the rooftop. Still not understanding why the meeting was here, Jae-yu started calling out for Gyul. Jong and Sohee were sitting on chairs in a quote, 0 pose, and their faces were very serious. And at the same time, they informed Ja-yu and Hyuk that they all had problems. The entire Somyung High School was filled with rumors that Ja-yu had slept with Hyuk. But that wasn't the strangest part. They were gossiping that So-hee was with them too. They also say that in reality, Ja-yu wanted to sleep with Jong-gyul. These were both true and distorted rumors. Still, Ja-yu didn't understand why such rumors spread. And Gyul added fuel to the fire, saying that they weren't just circulating, but actually growing. Girls kept following him, wanting to know if Cha-yu had really confessed to him. They themselves didn't understand what kind of strange confession this was. Now they thought even more that Cha-yu was a stalker and worried about Gyul. At first, the boy couldn't understand what was happening. So-hee was now worried that she had been subjected to all sorts of rumors during her friendship with Hyuk. But now some are gossiping that they are engaged, others that they are step-siblings. Such gossip even surpassed the rumor of their 10-year love affair. Jung-gyul was also worried that from a sane person, he had instantly become a fatal scoundrel. Ja-yu and Ja-hyuk guiltily looked at the floor. They had nothing to say. But they don't have time to mope around and need to take action. After all, if they don't react, people will imagine God knows what else. Ja-hyuk agreed with the proposal, but he had no ideas. Before, when he simply smiled, all questions naturally faded away. However, now this won't help others. Such a scheme only works for him. Then they started asking Ja-yu how she suggested they proceed. But she only agreed with Hyuk that if they kept denying it, the situation would only get worse. What Gyeol disagreed with, because the situation in middle school was worse than that. At that time, Ja-yu was a punching bag for all the students in the school. The girl still felt that the misunderstanding would only intensify if they started talking, and if they did nothing, the rumors would eventually die down. But Jong did not agree with her, and he asked her to think again, because it wouldn't be the end of rumors, but the end of her reputation. From now on, she would be considered a stalker and a psychopath. And Ja-yu instantly drooped, but So-hee asked her not to give up. Still, they don't know what to do. They can't sit idly by, and they can't deny it either. And if they tell the teacher, she still won't be able to help them. In such a situation, Jong-gyul saw only one way out: to create chaos. The other three stared at him questioningly, not understanding what that meant. The guy suggests making the situation even more confusing to throw everyone else off. To prevent gossips from coming up with different theories, these four will always go together, forming different groups each time. And soon, rumors started that Jae-hyuk was indeed dating So-hee. The students are surprised that after such rumors, these two are still seen together. Then, everyone saw So-hee walking with Gyul, and she was even laughing cheerfully. Some even thought they were imagining things, as this was something new. And then, Chae-yu walked with Jong-gyul, and he had to remind her to smile more often. They also saw that the same Gyul was quite close friends with Hyuk. No one could understand what was happening now, and they were only sure that something had happened between these four. After that, they started calling them a love quadrangle. However, with this, the students began to argue about who was actually dating whom. But also, general interest in this lineup gathered, which includes the most popular guy in school and the most inconspicuous girl. And also the popular guy's girlfriend for 10 years, and the friendly head student from the parallel class. And dramatic content unexpectedly arrived for teenagers tired of studying. After some time, these four gathered for another meeting. They didn't understand why the situation was getting more and more out of control. Obviously, Gyul underestimated Cha-hyuk's popularity. With his face, rumors won't just disappear, especially now. His looks are camera-friendly. He was born that way. In middle school, he changed his hair part, and even that became a huge event. Although Cha-yu was just minding her own business, she was branded a stalker. Now these four don't know what to do. Rumors have spread throughout the school. Now, even if they start saying that nothing happened, no one will believe them. So-hee suddenly noticed Jung-gyul's distrustful gaze on her, and she insisted that it was true, not understanding why he himself fell for these rumors. And then Ja-yu told him the whole story of the overnight stay, from beginning to end. The guy was in shock, not understanding why they had explained things so strangely before. After all, their phrases indicated something else, and yet he was glad that nothing had happened. So-hee started to scold him, asking why he hadn't clarified things earlier. Even if they deny everything from the very beginning, gossips will still believe what they want. After all, the rumor that Cha-yu was a stalker stuck to her just because others found it amusing. People love to discuss other people's lives, and they don't care if it's true or false. So he'll have to endure until everything settles down. And right now, everyone is wondering who Hyuk is dating. If he doesn't date anyone, the guys will think that everyone is just his friend. And the rumors will disappear on their own. And everyone else thought this idea was brilliant. Jae-hyuk was a little embarrassed that he was now forbidden to date anyone. And so he teased him that he was against it because he already had a girlfriend. Still, even though Hyuk was still awkward around Gyul, he would have to play basketball with him. While he was silently pondering this, he cast a discreet glance at Ja-yu. He was glad that now he would be able to spend more time with her. Later, class president Yang So-mi watched So-hee with Hyuk and felt envious. She was curious what it would be like to be his girlfriend, since he was quite unapproachable. It took her a whole week just to get his phone number. Then someone whispered to her that he wasn't dating So-hee, and rumors about another girl were also untrue. Besides, Go So-hee and Jae-hyuk look more like brother and sister. So-mi was even happy, because now she had a chance to try her luck. Then she noticed that Jae-yu approached the two of them, and Hyuk was happy to see her. Moreover, he immediately gave her his unrivaled smile, and jealousy, mixed with disappointment, once again overwhelmed the class president. Yang So-mi has been unrequitedly in love with Jae-hyuk since the first day of school. She asked her friend Jae-hee if she knew who this new guy was. That's how she learned his name, and she even liked the back of his head. So-mi considered it lucky that they ended up in the same class. She had been watching him ever since. But now, for the first time, she saw him so happy. Although Jae-hyuk had always been cheerful, now everything felt different. Then So-mi noticed that his and Jae-yu's elbows touched from time to time. This was strange because Hyuk doesn't like being touched, and Yeon knows that best of all. Although he smiled on the outside, he was always uncomfortable on the inside. Once she noticed that he was going to the store, and he politely offered to buy her something. But she suggested they go together, and she herself was afraid he would get angry because she touched his hand. Cha-hyuk always smiles, but constantly keeps everyone at a distance. It seems he's always surrounded by people, but often sits alone. At the same time, he was never against Cha-yu being by his side, and now they even often discussed sports results while trying to touch each other. So that no one would notice, he carefully touched her sneaker with his own. Hyuk also offered to help Ja-yu train, as their performance would be graded. And watching their behavior, So-mi gnashed her teeth in jealousy. And she realized that Ja-hyuk's aloofness changed depending on the person. She even bitterly realized that it wasn't that he disliked touch, but that he disliked her personally. But she comforted herself with the thought that he was comfortable because they were friends. And Jae-hyuk is one of those people who only lowers their guard for those close to them. Besides Jae-yu, he also plays well with the parallel class's head students. And So-mi was annoyed that he was paying a lot of attention to someone else, but not to her. For both guys, the barrier seemed very high because they didn't even look at each other during the game. And So-mi wanted to figure out why he let Cha-yu get so close. Although there's also So-hee, and guys always act colder towards each other. Then So-mi noticed how Hyuk and Go were standing quite close to each other. There was no more than 5 centimeters between their hands. It seems like they were about to hold hands. However, on the other side was Ja-yu, and Ja-hyuk was leaning more towards her, and the backs of their palms were almost touching. The class monitor was horrified to realize that there was definitely something going on between those two. She wanted to scream right there, but then the wrong rumors would spread about her, and she was left to suffer alone. She didn't want to believe that any of it was true. What also annoyed her was that it was Ja-yu, about whom strange rumors had been circulating for a long time. This girl has a very strange personality, and you can't really say she's very beautiful either. So-mi began to suspect that Jae-hyuk simply didn't know what kind of person she really was. After all, he studied far away from them in middle school. A little later, unable to bear her emotional distress, she approached him to talk. She had rehearsed the text beforehand, but standing in front of him, she was nervous. And Hyuk, without any suspicion, agreed to go with her to a secluded place. Once there, he started asking what urgent matters she had. The girl began by saying that her words might seem strange to him. Then she admitted that she knew who he liked and came to tell him about her. Inside, Hyuk suddenly flinched because he wasn't dating anyone. However, he pretended he had no idea what Somi was talking about. He even asked her to name the girl she thought he liked. Asomi asked him not to pretend because she saw everything and couldn't be fooled. Then, stumbling a little, she declared that he liked Nam Ja-yu. Ja-hyuk froze. Apparently, he himself hadn't yet understood this simple truth. He even asked her to repeat again who he liked. And Somi almost poked him in the nose, saying that he was constantly next to Ja-yu. During breaks, he often follows her closely, pretending to be going in the same direction. And he always approaches her first, but he never approached others like that. He also always takes care of Ja-yu, for example, shielding her from the sun when she's napping. At the same time, a smile spreads across his face, like that of a very happy person. Hyuk also buys her food or a drink, not for anyone else, but specifically for her, trying to choose something that she really likes the taste of. And he also treats her to candies. And all of this points to Somi's correctness. The guy started making excuses, saying he was doing it just because. He just wanted to share it with Ja-yu because they were friends. Besides, they were desk mates, and this girl was just a good person. At that moment, Ja-hyuk suddenly realized everything himself, as if he saw himself from the outside. But Yen Somi realized that this guy himself didn't know who he was in love with. And she began to assure him that she had misunderstood everything and believed him that they were just friends. Now she blamed herself for having told him everything unnecessarily, thereby pushing him. Then she started telling him that in middle school, Ja-yu had pursued her friend's boyfriend. There are also rumors that she's dating older men, but Hyuk wasn't listening to her anymore. He was thinking that he liked Ja-yu and hoped she didn't think otherwise. Somi then started apologizing for having called him for a talk for no reason, admitting that she had misunderstood everything. But the guy wasn't angry, and since the conversation was over, he got ready to leave. But the class president didn't want to let him go. She hadn't fixed everything yet. But the guy had already turned the other way when suddenly he froze, and she was afraid it was a complete failure. Unexpectedly, Ja-hyuk returned to her again, and quite quickly at that, as if he was rushing to do something very important. But he only stated that those rumors were lies, and that Ja-yu was a very good person, and he would like it if Somi understood that. After that, he was about to leave for good, wishing her a good appetite for lunch. Now Somi was only convinced of her version, because he didn't hide his emotions at all when denying it. Later, Gil came to the same steps, wondering why they were eating in such a place. Only Sohee was there now. Ja-yu had gone to the teacher's lounge with a question about English. However, she should be back soon, and Kyul decided to wait for her here. But soon, Ja-hyuk approached them, apologizing for being late as he walked. Sohee started scolding him, and he explained that someone had called him for a talk. He also admitted that Somi mistakenly assumed he liked Ja-yu. He himself still didn't want to accept it, but he was all flushed. He did list all of Ja-yu's good qualities, but for him, that doesn't mean he likes her. Sohee and Jung-gyul silently listened to his entertaining story, and then it suddenly dawned on the girl what he meant by his words. She and Gyul exchanged glances, and Sohee started to get annoyed on the spot. Then she began to tug at Hyuk's clothes, insisting that he had no right to take away her only friend. Even though the guy denied everything, it was all written on his face. But now, Go understood why he had been so active lately. Gaioel, on the other hand, believed that who to love was a personal matter, but it was better not to show it, for the sake of Cha-yu herself. Besides, even if Hyuk liked her, she herself, no matter what, would not get a boyfriend. And he became curious as to why, since she was a pretty girl, but he just didn't know what had happened to her in middle school. There was an unpleasant incident there with Song-bin and Saw-hee-ra. Ja-yu's school life isn't easy now, but back then, it was even worse. She was a quiet girl, but because of her beautiful appearance, the boys wouldn't leave her alone. One day, a guy named Yoon Jong-soo switched seats with the person she used to sit with, and her classmates started teasing him, saying that he wanted to become a couple with Ja-yu. And when they asked her opinion, if she minded sitting with another boy, Ja-yu calmly stated that she didn't care who she sat with at the desk, and her classmate was surprised by her kindness since she even accepted Song-chu. Nam Ja-yu had always been quiet and kind, and the kids started bullying her, considering her easy to manipulate. The boys started treating her quite roughly, trying to hug her, but because of her personality, she didn't even resist, thinking it was just friendship. Jung-gyul, however, saw that those guys were just messing around, and the girls thought that Ja-yu's communication with the boys was already crossing all boundaries. During that period, Ja-yu was helped by her classmate So Hae-ra, and coming up behind that jerk, she kicked him so hard in the ankle that his legs buckled. As a result, he fell to the floor with a crash, losing his balance, not understanding at first what had happened. But then, seeing after he got up that a girl had hit him, he instantly became angry. Hira calmly twirled her lollipop and stared at him like he was an idiot. And then, she sternly demanded that he get out of her way and not bother her. His friend advised her not to argue, because she knew a lot of older students. And Jung-soo walked away, muttering to himself about what a scoundrel she was. And Hae-ra came closer to Nam Ja-yu and invited her to take a walk with her. She sat her down at the desk, and her classmates were surprised that Hae-ra knew her. She only remembered her name because Ja-yu has a very beautiful face, and she's curious why Yu tolerates such disrespectful treatment. But the girl didn't know what to do. She was afraid Jung-soo would be upset if she refused, and Hae-ra directly called her a fool because she shouldn't care about him. Then other girls also started to notice how big and black Ja-yu's eyes were. Others liked how slender she was and asked what she ate. All this time, Jung-gyul had been watching her, but hadn't interfered yet, because So Hae-ra started taking care of Ja-yu, and they were friends for a year. But the situation changed when Hae-ra got a boyfriend, Oh Sung-bin. Among the students, he was also considered handsome, but he had quite a personality. Then Gyul somehow found out that Ja-yu and Hae-ra had a big fight. Since he was only an observer, he didn't know the details. However, Song-bin began spreading rumors that Ja-yu was stalking him. The girl herself, as usual, said nothing to protect herself. Because of her silence, the rumors began to be taken as truth, and she was dubbed a stalker. After that, Jung-gyul never saw Ja-yu interact closely with boys. He thinks it's somehow connected to Song-bin. Apparently, something bad happened between them, and after high school, Gyul's communication with her also stopped. But he's sure that if someone confesses their love to her, she'll most likely get scared and run away. Although Jae-hyuk shouldn't care, since he claims he doesn't like Jae-yu, just in case, Gyul even asked him again if he still stood by his words. Jae-hyuk suddenly felt a lump in his throat, but remained silent. And for a few seconds, all three sat in silence and contemplation. Gyul found it suspicious that Hyuk was so kind to the girl, who was struggling to fit in with the class, and he believed there was a hidden motive behind it. After all, there had been more than one or two such guys, and they all tried to hurt her. Meanwhile, So-hee silently prayed that Hyuk wouldn't fall in love with Ja-yu. After all, she can't lose a newly found friend because of him. Friendships with other girls didn't work out, as they only wanted Hyuk. Meanwhile, he couldn't understand why everyone thought he liked Ja-yu. After lunch, he went to class and waited there for her return. Then, as if by chance, he met her, admitting that he had been looking for her and waiting for her for lunch. Ja-yu explained that the English teacher had given assignments and that had taken time. She also admitted that it was her favorite subject, which is why she diligently studied it. When she said the word favorite, Hyuk suddenly felt something strange. He suddenly wanted her to say that word about him, too. But he also didn't want to allow any misunderstandings that would push her away. He also didn't want to stir up her old wounds, and now it seemed to him that he hadn't kept his distance properly. So the guy decided to fix this, starting today, and not even approach her first. He also decided not to start a conversation until Ja-yu did, but he was itching inside, and he thought that nothing bad would happen from just one question. So he was the first to ask if she was hungry, because she hadn't gone to lunch. Ja-yu was fine. Before class, So-hee had given her a bun and milk, which she would eat later. Only now, hearing that name, the guy noticed how So-hee was glaring at his back. He himself had brought Ja-yu a snack, but apparently he was too late to give it to her first. Later in class, they sat in silence for a long time, focusing on their studies. Then Ja-hyuk couldn't resist and glanced at his deskmate. He felt uneasy because she was too quiet. During the break, the four friends gathered as usual, but now Hyuk stood apart from Ji-yu. He remained silent, not even uttering a word on the way home from school. Ji-yu also walked in silence, even though she was in a normal mood, and even when saying goodbye, they just silently waved to each other. Cha-hyuk was now so upset, almost to tears, that this girl never spoke first. At home, he depressively fell face first into his pillow, but he understood that she had been quiet from the start. And the next morning, when he came to school, he saw Cha-yu talking to Gyul. His heart ached even more, as if sandpaper had been rubbed against it. After all, she wasn't just talking to him, she was also smiling sweetly. Hyuk felt hurt, even though he remembered that she had known Jung-gyul much longer. According to him, she no longer talks to boys, but he is clearly an exception. Then Hyuk remembered Cha-yu saying that he was the nicest guy she knew, and because of that, all his muscles, even in his fingertips, suddenly tensed up. Later, class president So-mi asked if everyone had submitted their applications for the sports competition. This is the school event that Cha-hyuk hates the most. After all, you have to interact closely with other players there, and he had already decided simply not to come to school that day, having come up with some excuse. But 2 teams had already been determined in the chat, and he and Ja-yu were on one of them. Both were shocked by the distribution, especially since they were going to play Pepero. Their faces turned pale with the realization of what they would have to do. The rule of the game was to hold a straw in your mouth and bite it until it broke. Ja-yu couldn't imagine how she would do this with Ja-hyuk. He, in turn, was also afraid that he would offend the girl by doing so. While they sat stunned, Kim Ki-min approached and asked Ja-yu to come out with her. She calmly looked up, as if asking what was required of her. And it wasn't just one girl who approached her, but a team of several people. Ja-hyuk immediately intervened, suspecting that the students wanted to mock Ja-yu. Ki-min explained that she only wanted to talk, but the guy insisted on talking here. However, Ja-yu was already being pulled along by the group, who explained that it was about the competition. The girls went to the restroom, and there, Ja-yu started trembling, afraid that bullying would begin, especially when Ki-min pressed her hand against the door behind her, giving her no chance to leave, and stated that a great responsibility now lay on Ja-yu. This made her flustered, but she realized that they weren't going to be rude to her. Then, Min briefly explained to her how many participants there would be from each class. There will be competitions in basketball, tug-of-war, and arm wrestling. But the students in their class are such that they won't be able to handle these sports. However, she wants to win the other contests to take first place. The teachers themselves included the Pepero game, but the rules of the game will be kept secret until the competition. Still, they need to practice, and it's required of Ja-yu that she wins. The girls could have asked Sop-yu-soo and Soo-yeon, but they broke up, so only Ja-yu and Hyuk are left. She was still surprised because the participants were supposed to be chosen randomly, and they admitted to her that it had been planned by the class president. After all, the main prize is 1 million won, and everyone will eventually receive 30,000. While the girls were gossiping in the corridor, Hyuk was pacing back and forth outside the women's restroom door. He was worried that his friend would be bullied, but he wasn't allowed to go in there. Suddenly, he saw a student from a parallel class walking by and asked her to go in and see what was happening. She immediately got scared, thinking the toilet was broken and the whole restroom was now filled with sewage. But the guy didn't mean that, though he didn't know how to explain it better. At that moment, the girls came out, and he immediately asked if Ja-yu was all right. The girl didn't understand why he was so worried, but assured him that she was fine. Ja-hyuk suddenly realized that he was crossing a line, but he still couldn't have just walked past if she was being bullied. Then he noticed the reproachful looks from the rest of the crowd, and he immediately pulled Ja-yu behind him, making a warning face. But Kim Ki-min, calmly walking past him, only wished him good luck. Her wish was echoed by the others, who giggled mysteriously and smiled knowingly. But the class monitor, who had come up with all this, was now suffering from jealousy that it wasn't her instead of Ja-yu. Soon the day of the sports competition arrived, and groups of students gathered here and there. And in the course of the process, the victory-obsessed Ki-min became more and more despondent. As she had thought, they lost the basketball competition. When it came to tug-of-war, her classmates also ran out of strength. In arm wrestling, a guy also participated who had muscles like a sparrow's knee. He had no strength left, but Min kept saying that a broken arm was better than a loss. In the end, his opponent took him down, and they suffered another loss. But hope still remained, as there were 9 more sports ahead. However, this class was smoothly sinking, and Min hoped they would at least win in Pepero. Now, all hope rests on one of the couples, Jung Yoo-jin and So Hyun-woo. The second couple, on whom hope is placed, are Nam Ja-yu and Yo Ja-hyuk. And many would bet against them because she avoids guys and he doesn't like being touched. Some doubted they would make it, thinking it was foolish to pair them together. It's just that others didn't know it was set up, because from the outside, it was obvious there was something between them. However, these two were sitting silently, almost turned away from each other, and looking at them, the headman and her assistant were already starting to lose hope. Suddenly, he ran off to find Woo-sop and Soo-yeon to have a serious talk with them. Because these two had recently broken up, and he pestered Sop to get back together with Yeon, even if just for a few hours. Since $1,000,000 was at stake, they couldn't miss the chance to get such money. Sop agreed and went to talk to his ex-girlfriend, with whom, just a few weeks ago, they were inseparable. And Ki-min was worried if the other couple would succeed, because they looked like complete strangers to each other. However, the elders only have these guys. If you put others in, they'll start throwing up. Thus, the time for the Pepero game competition arrived. The class representatives were asked to step forward, and Cha-yu and Hyuk walked as if to their execution. The other couple decided to put aside their disagreement for a while for the sake of money, and while participants from other classes looked in complete harmony, Ja-yu and Ja-hyuk were tense from head to toe. Hyuk promised her that he would break the straw right after biting it, but the girl asked him not to. Her nervousness suddenly began to subside. After all, it was her first time at a competition with her class, so she wanted to put in her best effort. She herself promised Hyuk that she wouldn't touch him in any way. She only asked him to try together to lead their class to victory. The guy was embarrassed, but still didn't refuse her. Then the participants were asked to line up. The game would start soon. Hyuk and Ja-yu waited in silence, but each of them was very nervous. The guy was tormented by the thought that they would have to kiss to win in the end. The other couples, on the other hand, couldn't wait for that moment. And looking at them, Hyuk became even more nervous, not knowing what to do now. Then the host reminded them that the couple with the shortest straw would win. Each couple has 7 seconds to eat the straw together without breaking it. They decided to start the competition with Team A, and Ja-yu and Hyuk exchanged anxious glances. Other students even started to mock them, wanting to see how these two would eat. Not far away, Jong-gol was standing and heard someone mocking. He approached the crowd to find out what was happening, and they invited him to watch too. The Pepero game was starting, and they even laughed at other participants who were trembling so as not to break it. The first couple's straw seemed very thin, and they say the teacher specially selected them for each team. But it seems suspicious to Gyul that this game was included in the sports competitions at all. For one couple, the straw tasted like toothpaste, and in another there were 2 guys. Only the class teacher didn't care, as if he had bought the most ordinary straws. But Gyul figured out that he had decided to play the villain and was now laughing at them. And then he paid attention when it was his friend's turn. They had already started chewing on the straw, but for some reason, Ja-yu began to cry. Tears streamed from her eyes, but she wouldn't let go of the game piece in her mouth for anything. Jang-gyul couldn't understand what had happened to her and why she was acting so strangely. And others already realized that they had gotten no ordinary straw. In fact, Sun Na-jong's homeroom teacher, who didn't like sweet couples, decided to let loose. And she smeared wasabi on the straw for such a couple, overdoing it, but that only pleased her. Jae-hyuk also felt the familiar spicy taste when he took the first bite. From the too intense taste of wasabi, he instantly turned red himself. Later, the teacher figured out this mean trick of Ki-min and was upset. And Na-jong asked her to calm down, because only Ja-yu was allowed to cry today, whose nose was already red and lips were blue. Hyuk also didn't look his best. He grumbled at her not to eat, but she reminded him that they had both decided to try, although she herself already wanted to tear the skin off her face because everything was burning so much. But overcoming herself, she began to eat the straw faster from her side. Everyone watching was shocked that these two were still holding on, and Ki-min started begging her not to give up so they could get at least one victory. Others followed suit, remembering that their prize money depended on it. Ja-yu was touched, thinking that her classmates were worried specifically because of her. The students already thought she was crying too much and started complaining to the teacher about her dirty trick. There were 4 seconds left until the end of the game, which stretched on for an eternity. But Ja-yu and Hyuk needed to finish eating the straw to win. The guy tried harder, not wanting his girlfriend to get upset. His heart was already pounding from the sharp taste and intense excitement, but he held on. And grabbing Jia by the neck with his hands, he began to press so that the cursed straw would be eaten up faster. And when there was 1 second left, a tiny piece remained between them. Then the long-awaited signal sounded, and the participants were invited to bring their straws. Jia and Hyuk had the shortest, and their team took first place. Ki-min was practically jumping to the sky with happiness, rejoicing and laughing. But then they suddenly noticed that Yu and Hyuk had disappeared, although they guessed where they had run off to. Reaching the cold water tap, the guy not only drank but also put his head under the stream. His heart was pounding wildly, and he felt like he was about to throw up. But the cool water did its job, and soon he felt a little better, and he tensed up so that the bout of nausea would pass. Immediately, Jia approached him, concerned about his well-being, and she understood that he was starting to feel nauseous because they were very close to each other. But the guy assured her he was fine. His face was just burning and his heart was pounding. Still, the girl was worried and insisted on going to the hospital with him, even tell the teacher, but then she realized she was asking the impossible of him. Hyuk was still relatively fine. He was more concerned that Jia was scared by their closeness, but the girl also assured him that it wasn't something scary or disgusting for her. Not knowing what to say, the boy was glad that thanks to her, they were able to win. Suddenly, he shyly lowered his eyes, as if he wanted to say something but was embarrassed. And then he just silently wiped the corner of Jia's mouth where there were crumbs. And he was pleased with himself, but more so because the girl didn't push him away. But because of that touch, his hands started trembling, and he attributed it to a simple spasm. While they were talking, Jung-gyul came out into the courtyard and noticed their cheerful conversation. And then he realized that Hyuk loved this girl, even though he swore he didn't like her. And in reality, this guy's words don't match his actions. Jung-gyul even felt a little disgusted by such self-deception, because worse than someone who doesn't understand the feelings of others is someone who doesn't understand their own feelings. When they returned, Ki-min couldn't wait to share the news with them. Their team won in women's soccer and kickboxing. Now their class is in 3rd place. But now they all surrounded Jia and Hyuk, congratulating the main characters again. They sympathized that the straw was too sharp, but were happy for their victory. After all, the other couple got a very thin straw, and it broke as soon as they touched it. Jia listened to them and couldn't get enough, but it wasn't their gratitude that pleased her. It was the fact that they spoke to her for the first time, to the one they always avoided. Then she decided to write to her parents, sister, and brothers that she had taken first place in the competition. They congratulated her, and when they asked what sport it was, she admitted it was playing pepero. The parents were slightly shocked, not understanding what cookies had to do with sports. Still, they were happy for their daughter, and even thought about sending her to a sports academy. Now they were chatting in the group chat. Bobei's sister was also surprised about the game. Brother Roy decided that the executives had lost their minds to add something like that to sports, and Kyung's patient was scared to death when he saw the dentist's strangely frozen face. All 3 of them were also curious who the youngest was paired with when she indicated it wasn't Sohee. The girl confessed it was Jaehyuk, and the siblings breathed a sigh of relief. Then Kyung-yi video called her so she could personally confirm that she took first place. Next to them stood Jaehyuk, who confirmed this, even showing the stamp they had been given on their hands. The older brother praised Jia and asked her to send a photo to the family chat. Class president So-mi stood nearby, curious about who they were talking to. Jia calmly admitted that it was her older brother. So-mi was surprised because by the voice, it was clear that it was an adult man who could be her father. He heard everything and barely held back his laughter along with the nurse. The class president was even more curious and tried to peek at the screen. And of course, she noticed the face of an adult guy there who was already disconnecting because he had to work. In the end, he only wished the children good luck and not to get hurt in the competition. After all, he currently has a patient waiting for a filling under anesthetic. But even so, he smiled crookedly because the doctors called him an old man. And So-mi remembered that this was the same person who used to pick up Jae-yu from school. Realizing he was a relative, she blamed herself for supporting those bad rumors. Soon, So-hee finished the obstacle course, which she's a pro at. It was easy for her, and she leaped over the obstacles with the grace of a ballerina. She didn't know yet that her friends had won and was worried that her victory wouldn't help a class. Then she noticed another couple, deciding that they had made up since they went to play Pepero. Suddenly, Gyul's voice rang out from behind her, scaring her half to death. Pulling her aside, he told her that thanks to Ja-yu and Ja-hyuk, their class won the Pepero game. The girl was frankly surprised as they were so shy. However, now it seemed to her, as it did to Gyul, that Cha-yu liked Hyuk. The only problem is that the guy himself doesn't realize it, even if you rub his nose in it. And suddenly, Gyul asked if there was any guy around So-hee, someone with an excellent character, and whom everyone would say was a good person. Song-chan, an old friend of So-hee, fits this description. He has a neat appearance and good behavior, and thanks to being raised by 3 older sisters, he possesses politeness, good manners, and common sense. So-hee quickly found this guy and brought him to talk to Jung-gyul. The guy was shocked when he found out what was expected of him. Those two wanted him to take care of Ja-yu, meaning to look after her. To be convincing, So-hee reminded him that he was the vice class president and had to fulfill his duties. And Gyul explained that they were worried about Ja-yu, who had a tough time at the competition. Chan thought they wanted to sacrifice him instead of Hyuk. Although he grew up under the influence of his sisters, Ja-yu really scares him, especially since So-hee herself previously claimed to be a stalker and then admitted she was wrong. In the end, the guy agreed. After all, Ja-yu is human, and he hoped it wouldn't be hard to take care of her if he didn't think of her as a psychopath. It was a hot day, and Ja-hyuk got a drink for Ja-yu. From a distance, he noticed her sitting alone under an umbrella and was glad that no one would disturb them. As he got closer, he offered her a cool can, suggesting she refresh herself. But the girl already had a drink, and she asked Hyuk to keep it. Feeling somewhat disappointed, the guy asked who had bought it for her, and she said Sung-chan's name, adding that she had never spoken to him before. Hyuk glanced at that guy standing aside, and he felt like giving him a smack on the back of the head. But then his attention was diverted by the girl's screams, as one of them was hit in the head with a ball. The students started to crowd around to see what was happening, and Ja-yu and Hyuk also came closer. He noticed that due to her height and the crowd, she couldn't see anything. He was about to help her push through, but at that moment, someone pulled her hand. Chan got ahead of Hyuk and led Ja-yu a little to the side, where there were fewer people. The girl thanked him, and Ja-hyuk felt like a loser again. However, this guy acquired the skill of charm while surviving among sisters, but Ja-yu thought such behavior didn't quite suit him, but it amused her. True, she held back her laughter so as not to accidentally offend him, and it turned out that she was just coughing. Sun Chong still understood that she was laughing, even though she tried to assure him that she wasn't. And Ja-hyuk, seeing all this, felt a strange, unpleasant feeling taking hold of him. For him, it was something incomprehensible, and at the same time, his heart began to clench. At that moment, the last game with papers was announced, and the participants were asked to step forward. Song-chan had to pass this competition, and Ja-yu wished him good luck. She said it timidly, but to Ja-hyuk's perception, she was practically dancing with cheerleading pom-poms. Now he envied Chan, who had managed to befriend Ja-yu in one day, while for him, it took a very long time. On the table was a box of sheets, and each participant drew one from it. Different tasks were written on the sheets, one for each person. Song-chan also came up and drew one, confident that there was nothing he couldn't handle. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed So-hee and Gyul staring at him strangely. Realizing what they wanted from him, Chan approached Yu and offered to go with him. He didn't explain anything yet, but she agreed, and Hyuk was left alone again. That recent feeling, which had already been pressing at his throat but had receded, began to gain momentum again. And Ja-yu, when she learned the gist of the matter, didn't understand why Song chose her. And the host had already reminded them that any participant who couldn't complete the task would be considered eliminated. For the task, the participant must also bring a suitable person, and Chang's note was to name the person who makes his heart flutter. And then So-hee and Gyul became worried, realizing that Sun could already be considered defeated, while Jae-hyuk silently envied that this task hadn't been assigned to him. Gyul tried to understand why things were once again not going according to their plan. A little earlier, when he asked So-hee to find a good guy, He explained this by saying that it would be good for Cha-hyuk to find a replacement so that he wouldn't think about Cha-yu. This way, they would drift apart, especially since Go herself didn't want them to meet. Besides, it would be better for Hyuk himself, since he doesn't understand his own feelings. After all, everyone around him has probably already noticed how he practically dotes on Cha-yu, and Hyul decided that this stubborn person could remain ignorant his whole life. Besides, if he doesn't know, then they won't start meeting. So he was not against such a plan, because besides Ja-yu, she has no other friends. But it's not clear to her why Jong-gyul is so against those two being together. She even suggested that he himself liked that girl, but the guy admitted that he gets angry when he sees her. But if he leaves her alone, she'll be lost. For example, she might join a cult or lose everything by falling for a financial pyramid scheme. So he didn't think Jae-hyuk was like a pyramid, but Gyul believed that his guilt was still present. That's how they brought Chan and Ja-yu together, who now have another task to complete. And so he and Gyul were worried that the guy's heart wouldn't even flutter for Yu. The girl even wanted to scold him for dragging her along to the round. Meanwhile, Gyul noticed how detached Ja-hyuk was staring at them. This guy just realized that he had started the fire himself while trying to put it out. It seemed to Gyul that Hyuk was starting to realize his feelings, and he prayed that he wouldn't. At this time, the host asked Chan to read the contents of the note aloud. Hearing this, the other students nervously whispered. However, Song was confident he could name the person who made his heart flutter. Shortly before this, he had given Ja-yu a brief consultation on what she would need to do, and now, a sensor was being placed on his arm, which would show his pulse. At that moment, Song Chang and Ja-yu exchanged a subtle glance. It was time to act. Now they need to make eye contact, and Yu started looking at Chan with that creepy stare. This will help him evoke the feelings he once had for this girl. At first, his pulse didn't change much, but then it started to rise rapidly. In the end, it exceeded 130, and the host, without hesitation, declared him the winner. The guy was grateful to Cha-yu, even though he had to relive the horror of the past. At the same time, Sohee, Gyul, and Hyuk thought that Chan had simply managed to get very close to her very quickly. Cha-hyuk was still full of sadness, but he understood that Yu deserved congratulations. However, he couldn't even take a step because he was now overwhelmed by annoyance and longing. And for now, it was announced that their class's overall ranking took second place. The students rejoiced, and Hyuk watched as Ja-yu sweetly spoke with Chan. He was sad, but at the same time, he was glad that she could now make friends with someone on her own. However, as she grew closer to other classmates, she would start to drift away from him, and this truth made him even more nervous, to the point of trembling. Suddenly, Ja-yu glanced at him and noticed his strange expression. Ja-hyuk immediately turned away. At that moment, he began to realize something else. While Ja-yu was asking if he had seen her run with the notes, he already understood that he was jealous of her with this guy who was now next to her. From the very beginning, he was drawn to Ja-yu, and he liked that she wasn't attached to people. Therefore, he shouldn't be disappointed or sad because of that the image of this girl is not turning out as he expected. Still, at that moment, Cha-hyuk felt unbearably sad and lonely. He wished he could tell her not to talk to others and to be with him like before. However, if it were like before, she simply wouldn't talk to him. In the end, what Hyuk truly wants is for Cha-yu to be only with him. They would create their own little world where no one else would exist. This thought had been embedded in his subconscious ever since he confessed his desire for friendship, and it actively began to make itself known when they were relaxing together on the floor at his place. Hyuk felt they had become quite close, and his dream could come true. And now he considered it unfair that she was smiling at someone else. Of course, he understood that his desire now was selfish and very childish, but only someone who has known unrequited love can understand him at this moment. Later at school, Kim Min quite proudly boasted about the 500,000 won check for second place. Even this makes her happy. Now everyone will get 18,000, the rest for class needs. And the girls kept asking Ja-yu how she made Chan's heart beat so fast. But instead of the answer she had prepared, she only nodded her head with a shout. Hyuk decided not to dwell on it because it's normal for Ja-yu to make new friends. He only has to get even closer to her, even though he doesn't know much about her. But then he remembered that he knew what her favorite snacks were. And a sign that people are close is knowing about that person. And now the guy decided to invite her to work out on the weekend. But as soon as he opened his mouth, Chan came over and asked her to go somewhere with him for the weekend. The girl was surprised, and Hyuk was angry that this guy was bothering them again when he wasn't asked to. And his first desire was to immediately punch him in his arrogant face. However, Ja-yu went outside with Chan to talk about his invitation. He timidly began by saying there was a place he'd like to go with her. And then he noticed So-hee and Hyuk spying on them through the window like secret agents. The guy naturally got angry that they were eavesdropping on someone else's conversation. He even reminded them that So-hee always thought Ja-yu was a psycho from Japanese horror movies. Still, he didn't argue for long, as he was short on time, and he admitted to Ja-yu that she looked scarier than anyone he knew, referring to her aura. The girl was suddenly shocked, but she still understood him, and those two became even more alert, not understanding what Chang was getting at. And he explained that there's this one guy, also very creepy like Ja-yu. So he's asking her to go with him, because he's too scared to go alone. Then he reminded his curious friends that there were actually 28 of them in the class. So he was already starting to tremble. Chan's story was taking an increasingly frightening turn. It's as if he's talking about a ghost, but there really is another one listed in the register, Chae Soo-ji. It's just that after the school year started, that guy never came to school. The teacher went to his house, and Chang and So-mi tagged along with her. When Song Na-jong knocked, a very creepy, human-like silhouette appeared in the doorway, and they all understood that it was a person, although through the murky glass it seemed like a monster was there. Seeing this, all three of them got goosebumps and a desire to immediately get out of there. But the teacher was worried that if he continued to miss classes, he would be expelled. At the same time, none of the students in the class, and even no one from outside, knew Suji. Sun Chan, whom the teacher asked, even inquired in parallel classes, but there was no news. Na-jung couldn't even contact that guy's parents and was worried. She even thought he had some serious family problems, especially since Sonyang High School is private and the tuition here is very expensive. And Chan, out of foolishness, blurted out that he could go to Suji's again on the weekend. He told the teacher about it quite bravely, but he himself was scared to death. And So-mi declared that she wouldn't return to that area even under threat of death. So Song Chan is now asking Ja-yu to go there with him. The girl agreed, and when the weekend came, they went to the specified address. For his friend's safety, Cha-hyuk also went with them. The brawler, So-hee, didn't abandon her friends either, although she was scared deep down. Passing through a space that looked more like a horror movie set, they approached the house where Suji lives, and this neighborhood was gloomy even in daylight. Amidst all this horror, So-hee noticed that Jae-hyuk was practically glowing, and she wondered why on earth he was so dressed up, as if for a celebration. The guy put on his favorite sweater and new sneakers, which he had saved for a special occasion. It was also noticeable that he used styling products for his hair. Hyuk was just really happy that he would be able to see Ja-yu on the weekend, but this wasn't how he imagined it. He wanted to meet her and chat, to share their hobbies with each other, and so he taught her how to act. Mostly, she would just have to stare, as she usually does, and that guy himself will look away, and Chan advised to move faster. It's getting scarier here. And only Ja-hyuk was unaffected. His only fear was sadness due to Yu's distancing. The girl noticed his sadness and decided to cheer him up a bit, but she decided that he simply had other plans and thanked him for going with them. Besides, she feels much calmer when they are all together. After such a speech, this terrible weekend didn't seem so bad to him. Song Chan was the first to knock on the door, asking if anyone was home. No one answered, and so he suggested ringing the doorbell. Hyuk noticed that Chan was sweating with fear, even though he thought Chan was only afraid of his sisters. And he admitted that he had only caught a glimpse of that guy, but that was enough for him. There are also rumors that Suji has bright blue eyes, like a zombie. And then this terrifying guy approached them from the other side and called out. Then he demanded to know who they were and what they were doing near his house. The guy's appearance was indeed terrifying, and his voice was rough, as if from hell. And these four fell into a stupor upon seeing his blue eyes, which indicated that he was a foreigner. Chan, hiding behind Ja-yu's back, explained that the school was worried about his absences, and that he would be expelled if he continued to skip, but Suji wasn't going to go there. Song Chan once again broke out in a cold sweat from fear, and Jia Yu didn't understand why this person was acting so recklessly. Besides, he didn't seem as scary to her as she had been told, and she had seen quite a few creepy faces in her life. Not knowing what to say, she just stared at him, as instructed, and it seemed to infuriate the owner of the dwelling. He even winced. The girl continued to be silent, and he leaned in close, asking why she was staring. Jia Yu merely apologized and explained that she was looking at him out of curiosity. Now he didn't seem scary to her at all, and she didn't understand why everyone was afraid of him. However, the guy continued to spew aggression, deciding that she was asking for trouble. But then, Ja Hyuk stepped in front of her, shielding her so she wouldn't get hit. Suddenly, all his bravery was evident, and he himself was ready to fight if necessary, and confidently demanded that Ji move further away and only then talk. Apparently, Suji was only pretending to be a dangerous type, as he declared that he didn't care and went into the house. But Song Chan, emboldened, stopped him, not letting him close the door behind him. They started pulling the door, each towards themselves, and then, after another push, the door hit Jia Yu, who had suddenly appeared there. Her friends froze in place, horror etched on their faces, and their eyes betrayed panic. The door quietly swung open in the other direction, and they saw that Jia Yu's face was bruised, and she herself remained standing, as if she had been pressed into the wall and stuck there. Suji cautiously peeked out from behind the door to see what she had hit. It was clear from his eyes that he, too, was frightened by this accident. Then the shock passed, and Chang was the most panicked, because Jia Yu's jaw was shattered. Suji clutched his head. These were the last troubles he needed. However, he only grumbled that it was her own fault for meddling where she shouldn't. As he went back into the house, he barked for them not to come to him again. The door slammed shut behind him, and the disciples realized the mission had failed. Hyuk really didn't care, as it meant fewer worries and problems. But So Hee and Chan weren't going to let this guy off the hook so easily for his misdeed. The girl even wanted to kick down the door so he would answer for his actions. And while Chan held her back, Hyuk fussed over Jia Yu, but she was fine, just a busted lip. Now she was suddenly concerned that Jae-hyuk was too close to her. Then they sat on the steps, the bleeding didn't stop, and Hyuk was worried there would be a scar. And Jae-yu was worried that he wasn't comfortable at such a close distance. She only explained that she always starts bleeding from a small injury, but she's fine. And then Song Chan threw himself at her feet, begging her to forgive him, because it was all because of him. After all, she was beaten, but she is sure that Sue did not do it on purpose, and Chan was only convinced that she was not normal. You can tell right away from this guy that he is a school bully, if not worse. Therefore, Song believes that it would be even better if he did not go to their school. So Hee also showed concern for her friend, taking off her top sweater, and she started wiping away the blood, which just wouldn't stop. Hyuk suddenly noticed that So Hee and Chanu were quite at ease with Jia Yu. He also wished there was such understanding and ease between them. Giving in to his instincts, he touched her shoe with his sneaker again. However, Jia Yu immediately pulled her foot away, as if she didn't like it. It was as if the boy had been doused with ice water. He didn't understand why she had become so distant. Moreover, she only tried to keep her distance from him, and that bothered him. After sitting a little longer, the friends, splitting into pairs, began to say their goodbyes. Cha Hyuk left with Cha Yu, thinking on the way how to start a conversation. The stairs came in handy, of which there were many here, and he was worried that Cha Yu's legs hurt. He suggested walking slower if it was hard for her, and also admitted that it was his first time in this area. But to all his diligent speech, she only sighed heavily. Jia Yu was lost in thought, and came to when Hyuk realized she was worried about that guy. She was indeed concerned that he was having problems, which is why he wasn't coming to school. And Hyuk didn't understand her concern, because that scoundrel hadn't even apologized to her. But Jia Yu is someone who always cares and thinks about other people, even without distinction. Besides, this guy is not her friend, not even a fleeting acquaintance. However, if Hyuk tells her all this, she might get upset, and he doesn't want that. After all, a person can worry about someone, even if they barely know them. On the day they first went to school together, they weren't friends either. It was true, but he didn't want to hear such an answer from her right now. And all that's left for him is to go with the flow, hoping for the best. Jia Yu entered the house, covering her wound, and immediately called out to everyone. But in response, there was only silence, and on the refrigerator she saw 3 notes. Each of the relatives had gone somewhere on business, and the girl was glad about it. She intended to go see Suji again, even though Chan wouldn't want to go back. So he also has plans. She has some extracurricular activities. She can't call Hyoka. He doesn't like that guy. At the same time, Ja-yu didn't even know how to persuade Suji, even if she went to him. But then an idea came to her mind, and she hoped it would work. Very soon, she found herself back in that terribly gloomy neighborhood, where a homeless alcoholic now lay on almost every corner. Reaching the right house, Za-yu knocked on the door, hoping someone would open it. She didn't have to wait long. The door opened and a displeased Sue came out. In a rough voice, he reminded her of the demand not to come, but the girl did not give up. And before it closed again, she asked him to listen to her, because she would tell him the reason why he had to come to school. The next day, morning at school began as usual, but then the students suddenly started turning around in fear. Since Suji appeared there, he looked like a foreigner by his eyes, but no one had heard of anyone like him studying there, and his appearance was alarming, and one could only guess what this guy was up to.